Okay, Mayor Beach, it's all set.
Great, thank you so much, Madam City Clerk. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Burlingame City Council meeting. Tonight is Monday, already August 17th, 2020, and we're glad that you joined us. We're calling the meeting to order now at 7 p.m. and I would like to just briefly hand it over to our City Clerk to give instructions for members of the public who may not typically join us on these virtual meetings. She'll share with you a little about our protocol virtually of how you can participate in the meeting.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. So what I'd first ask is if you are not called on to speak during a public comment section, that you keep yourself on mute and your video off, just so that we can keep this meeting up and streaming. Secondly, if you would like to comment, there's a couple ways to do that on an item. You can either email in to publiccomment@burlingame.org. You can Zoom chat, which just goes directly to me, or you have the capability of raising your hand. And Mayor Beach, excuse me, I forget, what button is it for phone calls in?
For anyone who wants to call in, if you're dialing in, you can dial *9 and we'll know you've raised your hand.
Perfect. So those are the ways to let me know that you would like to speak.
All right, thank you, Madam City Clerk. We appreciate that. As is our tradition, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and we'll please stand and join me now. Thank you. Put our hands over our hearts. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next item is our roll call to make sure we have everyone in attendance. Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember Coulson? Here. Councilmember Brownrigg?
Present.
Councilmember Ortiz?
Here.
Vice Mayor O'Brien?
Here.
Mayor Beach?
Here. Thank you. We're all present. Moving on to our next item, we did not have a closed session, so there are no items to report out. Item number 5, we have some upcoming events and announcements. And I think just before I cover a few announcements and then I'll ask colleagues if they have any others, just want to take a moment to give an extra special thanks to our staff. Over the summer is typically a time when the city, not that anybody stops working, but it's usually there's a little bit of a break from regular meeting schedules. It's a time to catch up and a lot of work happens. Sometimes people get a little vacation time. None of that really happened in a meaningful way over the summer because of COVID-19, and our staff has worked incredibly hard to respond to all the different needs. We appreciate that. And colleagues on council have been working a lot on subcommittees, lots of continued meetings. So just thanks to everybody for working so hard through this challenging time for our community. Announcements, probably the most important one is just a reminder to everyone, please wear your face covering at all times when you're outside of your home. And please keep safe social distance at least 6 feet from anybody who is not a member of your household. So whenever you're outside, it doesn't matter if you're exercising or if you're on the avenue or taking a walk, if you can't keep 6 feet safe social distance with somebody outside your household, it is the law. You need to have a face covering or you could potentially be fined for it. So please, everybody cooperate and we'll get through this challenging time together. We have an announcement that the Youth Advisory Committee is accepting applications for youth who are between 7th grade and 12th graders to participate with the Parks and Recreation Department. This is an opportunity to not only develop some great leadership skills, but advise the Parks and Recreation Department and Commission on matters that pertain to young people in our community. And often there's opportunities to also interact with City Council and advise us on matters that affect youth there as well. If you're interested, go to burlingame.org to our Parks and Recreation web page, and under Youth and Teens, under Programs, you can find out more information about the opportunity. We'll hope we'll get another crop of fantastic young people helping us on that effort. We also wanted to announce that fall sports in the Parks and Recreation Department for grades 4 through 8 will be offered in a limited way, look a little bit different than in years past, but volleyball, flag football, tennis, and cross country will be available. You can go onto our city's website as well there. And the only other announcement that I have top of mind is that the virtual Burlingame Spirit Run will take place over Labor Day weekend. It's a much beloved event in this community to benefit Burlingame Community for Education Foundation, a great cause. So if you're interested in running or walking and doing it virtually on your own time over Labor Day weekend, find out more on bcefoundation.org. Colleagues, do we have, one other announcement, our bicycle pedestrian master plan open house. We can't have one that is in person, so there will be a virtual version of it. There'll be more in the city's e-news coming out this week. We'll hope you'll participate in that as well and give us some feedback on the draft recommendations. Colleagues, do we have other announcements? I see Councilmember Brownrigg has his hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In light of the announcement from Washington about ending the census early, I just think at each of our council meetings, we ought to remind listeners and to tell our friends and especially folks who may not believe it matters, to remind them how important it is to fill out the census if they haven't, and to help the rest of our community remember that September 30th is the drop dead deadline according to Washington, D.C. So that's earlier than expected. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Great point. Thank you for that reminder. And San Mateo County is definitely doing a good job with response rate, but we can always be better. Everybody must be counted. Any other colleagues with announcements? Seeing none. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Coulson.
I was just actually looking for the date and time, but I'll actually get it and put it in the community corner of the e-news. And that is the San Mateo County Historical Society is having their annual fundraiser, and it will be, I believe it's in September. I think it's around the 18th or the 19th. I'll get the exact date. It's going to be virtual, and it's going to be a great opportunity to help raise funds so that we can have teachers online locally still connect with all the kids that come and visit the museum. And we're looking for both sponsorships as well as people who may want to attend. We have a special, amazing surprise guest, and I'll put all that together in an email for the e-news so people can join.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Great announcement. We appreciate all the Historical Society does for our community. Go ahead, Madam City Clerk.
I'd just like to remind everyone to register to vote as well. We're going to start sending out ballots on October 5th, and they will be sent to everyone's house. So please check your voter registration to make sure everything is accurate, especially your mailing address. So you might have to re-register to vote. And if you haven't registered to vote, you have up until 15 days before the election, but I would highly recommend that everyone get their registration in before October 5th so that those ballots will be sent out to you in the first wave. That's it.
Thank you. And you're doing a great social media campaign on that too, Madam City Clerk. Thank you. Nothing more important than voting and census, that's for sure. All right. Moving on then, with seeing no other announcements, we'll go on to, we don't have any presentations tonight under item 6, so we'll move on to item 7, which is public comments that are non-agenda items. This is the opportunity when members of the public can speak to us about anything that's on your mind that is not currently on tonight's agenda. Due to the Ralph M. Brown Act, which is the state and local agency open meeting law, we cannot act on any matter you bring up. We can't deliberate on it, but we can certainly listen, staff can respond, and we can consider it for a future item. If you do have comments and you've joined us tonight for an item that is on the agenda, like our street closure program, that will be coming up pretty soon, and you can hold your comments under that item at that later time. So, Madam City Clerk, do we have any public comments at this point not on the agenda?
I don't have any emails or chats or hand raised, and there's no one calling in.
Okay, final scan there. I don't see anybody raising hands other ways as well. So we will move on then to item number 8, which is our consent calendar. And these are items, a number of items that can be approved in a single motion unless we pull them for a separate discussion. So let me ask colleagues if there's anybody who wishes to pull an item on our consent calendar. Looking through. I don't see any. I do see, yes. Vice Mayor O'Brien, go ahead. Which item?
It will be 8C and 8K. Oops.
I'm sorry, I heard 8C, but I didn't hear the other one.
8K.
8K. Okay, thank you. And Council Member Brownrigg, do you have additional items you'd like to pull?
Madam Mayor, I have a very quick question about item 8F as in Frank. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll do one last check. I don't see any other hands up from colleagues. I'd like to ask the city clerk if there's any members of the public who wish to pull an item from our consent calendar.
Mayor Beach, I haven't gotten an email. There's no Zoom chats and no hands raised.
Okay, so with that, I would like to entertain a motion to approve items 8A, B, D, E, G, H, I, J, L, and M. N and O, sorry.
So moved, including O.
All right, thank you. So that's a motion from Councilmember Ortiz, and I wasn't sure
Second.
who the second was from, but I did hear Councilmember Brownrigg come in there second, so we'll go that direction and we'll take our roll call vote.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Yes.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. All right, so that motion passes. We'll turn it over to Vice Mayor O'Brien for item 8C.
I'm actually just pulling it off because, excuse my dog that's barking in the background. But I'm just pulling this off basically knowing that I will not be voting for this item. And usually when we talk about consent, it's usually done unanimously. So I just wanted to pull that off. I don't need the staff report or anything read. I just wanted to make a comment. And I'm voting no because I've asked in the past whether we have enough energy to go forward with all electrical eventually, or all electric eventually for single family homes, multifamily, commercial. And this week is a prime example of not having enough energy on that grid due to, a temporary heat wave that we have. It may be good policy, but I just think it's really important to have the infrastructure and the technology to actually support it. And so that has been my concern. So with this item 8C, I'm going to vote against it due to that fact. I just don't think our infrastructure is ready. It's just kind of like, Governor Newsom talking on a different subject in regards to, let's say, the unemployment checks that have been delayed for so many weeks. And the response is, well, our computer technology is not up to speed. Well, we can't do things if we don't have infrastructure to support it. And so this is just something, like I said, it may be good policy. I'm just not sure if we're ready for it yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor O'Brien. We appreciate your comments. Colleagues, does anyone else have any additional questions or comments before we open up to public comment? All right, seeing none.
Sorry, it just takes a minute to.
Sure,
Gotta
go ahead, Councilmember Coulson.
So thank you. And I can really appreciate the Vice Mayor's comments on this. These are two comments that I have asked the Peninsula Clean Energy staff, which is, we all know, is the group that is in charge of procuring energy, myself. And what it's coming down to is making sure that we're generating enough electricity during the high peaks of demand in order to make a match there. And PCE has committed to basically getting that in line so that all energy production and demand are pretty much lined up within the next 2 years. And I believe the state is also moving that way. So I'm going to support the motion, but I do want to recognize that this is the Vice Mayor brings up a really important question that Peninsula Clean Energy has been grappling with, which is battery storage, resiliency during fires and heat waves, and then also matching demand load, supply with demand load. And we're working very hard on it.
Rafael Reyes is on in case you have any questions directly for PCE.
Or he can make a public comment if he wants to, I guess.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. Colleagues, any other questions or comments before we open up to the public? And we appreciate that insight, Councilmember Coulson, and your hard work on the PCE board. There's been some amazing work that's been done over the last few years since the county started that as well. So with that, let's open up to public comment. And yes, we would love to hear from PCE or anybody else who would like to speak on this matter.
Raphael's hand is up.
I'll unmute him.
Hi, this is Rafael Reyes, Director of Energy Programs for Peninsula Clean Energy. And I want to thank City Council and all the staff for all their hard work on this item. I want to provide some information with regards to the concerns raised by the Vice Mayor. Peninsula Clean Energy has done analysis with regards to the impact of breach codes on electrical load. Taking the maximum likely scenarios, we have determined that all electric buildings looking out to 2025 would add less than 1% load to what PCE currently serves. So it's a very marginal amount of additional load. Electric vehicles will also add some small amount, a little bit more than that. And at this point, Peninsula Clean Energy is extremely confident in being able to serve the added load. The issues that the grid is experiencing today and these past few days are related to the infrastructure, which still is in need of greater hardening as a statewide issue and some additional investment, just like other areas such as the natural gas distribution grid. But from an electrical capacity standpoint, in terms of generation, that's not something we are seeing as an issue.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. We appreciate your giving us some peace of mind there, and we've certainly had some meaningful and thoughtful conversations in the past, and we appreciate that insight as well. Any other members of the public who wish to speak?
Mayor Beach, I do not see any hands raised, and I don't have chats or emails.
Okay. And with that, we've had a lot of discussion on this item. I think we've talked to study sessions and multiple meetings. And I think for those of us who are supportive, I think we can be really proud. This is really pushing the limits, but doing so in a responsible way. And I think we can feel good about it if we vote for it. So with that, let's go ahead. I see Councilmember Brownrigg has his hand up. Go ahead.
I was simply going to make a motion to approve item 8C, Madam Mayor. I concur with your comments. I do recognize the Vice Mayor's concerns, especially at this time of this particular time, but nevertheless, I think for all the reasons described, it's appropriate to move forward, and I feel comfortable with the risk. So make a motion to approve.
And I'll second it.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg, for putting forth the motion, and Councilmember Ortiz seconding it. Let's take our vote.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
No.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. Okay, motion passes 4-1. Thank you, colleagues, for that. Moving on to item 8F. I believe that was Councilmember Brownrigg had a comment or a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and this will be very brief. This has to do with a large paving contract for various streets in Burlingame. I'm sure they're all very useful repavings and so forth, but one small item caught my eye and it led me to think. So one of the small items in the staff report is that a very small piece of this paving contract will be to do some tiny portion of the pathway along Easton. And I just really wanted to use this a little bit, maybe a little inappropriately, to lobby our public works staff, and maybe there are plans in the works, but we all walk a lot more these days with COVID. And I just can't help feeling, as a longtime resident of that part of Burlingame, that the sidewalk on Easton, especially what might be the north side of Easton that the library is on, is really overdue for some TLC. It could be wider in places. It certainly could be more even. I was with my 90-year-old mother-in-law, and it is incredibly difficult to navigate with a wheelchair So it's really an indirect pitch for putting this on our priority list. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. Colleagues, other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll open it up for public comment. Madam City Clerk, is there anybody who wishes to speak on this item?
No, Mayor Beach, I don't have any emails, chats, or hands raised.
Okay, then with that, would someone like to make a motion on this particular item 8F?
I'll make that motion, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Brownrigg. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Ortiz, I think, was first. We'll go ahead and take a vote now.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Yes, sorry.
no worries, Mayor Beach,
Yes. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And I believe the final item we pulled from the consent was item 8K, and we'll turn that back to Vice Mayor O'Brien.
Yes, actually, I just pulled it off for clarification. So my understanding then is if it's on the consent due to Councilmember Brownrigg, I think in the minutes, when I read the minutes today, mentioned for this to come back in the third or fourth quarter this year. That's just my clarification, because we already voted on this in April of 2020, and it was a 3-2 vote, as mentioned in the staff report, with Mayor Beach and Councilmember Ortiz dissenting.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We'll have the Finance Director or who would like to respond from staff. I think this is really just a point of housekeeping clarification to get the resolution in order, but staff can better explain that.
Indeed. This is Carol. We did put it on the agenda because in setting the role with the fee as proposed and passed by the council, the county asked us for a resolution, which is when we realized we didn't have a resolution.
Okay.
And it was a little bit late to be asking the mayor to sign a revised resolution. As I stated in the staff report, we could go back to the county and say we don't really need a resolution, but because the action taken at that meeting was so different than the drafted resolution that we had attached to the item, we thought we should clarify and it's merely for clarification.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Does anybody else have questions or comments on this before we open up to public comment? All right, seeing none, Madam City Clerk, anybody wishes to speak on this item?
no, Mayor Beach, I don't have any emails, chats, or hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Would someone like to propose a motion to approve item 8K?
So
Move to
moved.
approve my,
I think I heard the Vice Mayor make that motion, and do we have a second? Sorry, there were a couple people speaking at once, so
second.
thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. We'll take our roll call vote.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Aye.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Yes.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, we don't have any public hearings, but item 10, we do have some staff reports and communications on the item that many members of our public may be tuning in tonight to speak, to participate in this item, which is an update and discussion of the temporary street closure program for both Broadway, downtown Burlingame Avenue, and parklets on the side streets in the downtown area to facilitate safe outdoor dining and pedestrian activity. And so we'll also discuss tonight direction about personal services in the public right of way. So with that, I believe we've got multiple authors of the staff report. I'll give the city manager a chance to do any framing, or feel free to turn it over to whoever you're.
I'll just cut them a little slack here and I will do the staff report. But I do have Syed Martuza, Public Works Director, Kevin Gardner, our Community Development Director, and then Joe Sanfilippo, our Economic Development and Housing Specialist, are all on the call. We also have Chief Matucci. What I'd like to do is give the full staff report and then have you discuss each piece separately. I think that might make the conversation flow a little bit better. So there's 3 pieces to it and you outlined them, Mayor Beach, in your opening. So the first piece is the Broadway street closure. The second piece is what to do about downtown Burlingame Avenue. And then the third piece is what to do about personal services. So I'm going to give the full staff report and then we'll go back to Broadway. And I do see some of our Broadway friends are on the call on the meeting tonight. So just as a little background, back on June 9th, we held a special meeting to discuss temporarily closing off downtown Burlingame Avenue. And that was to facilitate, I guess we have been on recess, safe outdoor dining, and you directed staff to implement temporary street closures, which we did. On July 6th, we went back to the council, and that was your last meeting before recess, and we asked you to authorize extension of the pilot program to temporarily close off the avenue until the end of September, and that's so that we could do a little bit of work towards environmental review of the closure. And we also asked you to authorize us to go forth with parklets in front of restaurants on the side street as a way to give those restaurants an opportunity to participate in expanding their outdoor seating capacity. Because when you close the avenue, the restaurants on Lorton and Chapin and Primrose and Howard and Park don't get to participate. So you gave us that permission to go forth with the parklets. Same time, you authorized a pilot program to temporarily close off Broadway for 2 weekends. That was just a trial period, and then said, discuss it at the Economic Development Subcommittee and see how we do. So on July 29th, the Economic Development Subcommittee, and that's Vice Mayor Keegren, Councilmember Ortiz, and then a whole lot of city staff, held one of many special meetings that we held over the break to talk about the street closures of Broadway and Burlingame Avenue and the parklets on the side streets to see how we were doing. We had Jenny Kelleher, the president of the Downtown Business Improvement District. We like acronyms, so we'll call them DBID. And John Kavranian, president of the Broadway Business Improvement District, or BBID. And then Georgette Naylor, president and CEO of the Burlingame SFO Chamber of Commerce, were all participants in that meeting, along with Terry Horn, who represents landlords and tenants in the downtown area, and Sam Abbasi. And I'm sorry, I don't know who Mr. Abbasi represents, but he also was on the meeting. So just going forward on Broadway, per the council direction, we implemented the temporary street closure of Broadway. We did that for the weekends of July 18th and 19th and July 25th and 26th. And as you'll recall from our discussion about Broadway, that closure is from 4 p.m. on Saturday all the way through to 10 p.m. on Sunday. There was an interest in closing down on Fridays, but because of the traffic on and off of Highway 101 at Broadway, we recommended against doing that closure. Also, we would have had to close from 4 o'clock on Friday all the way until 10 p.m. on Sundays. We just don't have the staff to go back and forth with closing and opening and closing and opening. And there are a number of businesses that wanted to maintain their parking during the day on Saturdays. And so we did have the closure just, again, 4 p.m. on Saturday until 10 p.m. on Sunday. And it was really successful. The folks who are visiting Broadway are wearing their face coverings, which we're very happy about. They're maintaining proper social distancing. And so the Economic Development Subcommittee heard that feedback and they recommended going forth and continuing the closure. So that happened on the last 3 weekends, so August 1st and 2nd, 7th and 8th, and then just this past weekend. We are tracking complaints at the staff level, and I know the council gets complaints on a whole variety of subjects periodically, and then they come down to staff, but we have not been receiving complaints about Broadway. It's going really well there. We haven't been hearing about traffic circulation issues or parking issues on Broadway or in the surrounding neighborhoods. It is very tight there, lots of one-way streets, lots of narrow streets, some parking challenges, but the closure is really not having a impact in that area. So we're very happy with the way that's going. I know that the Broadway bid has also given us positive feedback. They're very happy about this. And so the Economic Development Subcommittee met yet again on August 12th and indicated their support for continuing with the temporary closure of Broadway on weekends. That all being said, that if something changes, if all of a sudden we have a whole lot of big social gatherings, if we have a lot of people running around without their face coverings or whatnot, we reserve the right to reconsider. But our recommendation from staff and from the subcommittee is to go forward and continue with Broadway. Moving along to Burlingame Avenue, we started that program back in June. And that program originally was from Friday at 8 a.m. to Sunday at 10 p.m. So again, we want to set the barriers up once and then leave them there until they come down. But Burlingame Avenue, unfortunately, we're getting a lot of different feedback than we get from Broadway. And I don't know if it's because Broadway is more local serving and then Burlingame Avenue is attracting people from all over the place, but we are getting a lot of complaints about folks not using face coverings, not adhering to social distancing requirements. There's kind of preteens and young teens who are riding their bikes up and down the street pretty quickly. I know they clipped someone, I think it was about a week ago. We're just getting a lot of complaints about adverse impacts. In addition, some of the retail businesses have really found that the closure is having a negative impact on their businesses. They, because part of the challenge for them is that we don't have the cross streets open, and we did that, closed the cross streets because we were worried about people just walking and not paying attention and then walking in front of cross traffic. And so particularly some of the businesses right near the cross streets are really suffering and having a hard time with the closure. And so that was the input that we had for the subcommittee. The DBID did a survey of their members. They had done a survey before all of this started. They did another survey more recently just to obtain feedback regarding street closures. And this time they received 81 responses to the survey, which is pretty good. They had 22 restaurants, 36 retailers, and 23 service providers. So that's salons, attorneys, et cetera. Less than half were located on the avenue. So 36 on the avenue, 45 on other streets in the downtown area. And the results were kind of mixed. So 24 of the businesses were helped by the street closure for Burlingame Avenue. 29 were hurt by the street closure, and that included a restaurant, retailers, and services on and off the avenue. And so for the folks off the avenue, it may be that it's hard to drive around and find parking because the side streets are closed. We don't know, we don't have that information. 26 businesses were unaffected by the street closure, and then 2 were just not sure if they liked it or not. And then if their business, if any challenges they were having were related to the closure or really just the generic COVID is terrible for everyone and creating problems. So major concerns that respondents indicated were parking challenges from the closure, lack of face coverings and social distancing, and then some smaller group indicated that they were challenged by lack of curbside pickup parking. So folks really want to be able to pull right up and get whatever they're buying, and they can't do that. So, you know, the survey was, we did not do the survey, it was the DBID, but they found that, you know, it was really a mixed bag, that there were some people who really liked it, some people really didn't like it. I think if you talk to the public, it's pretty popular. But the public is not worried like I am and like some of the other staff are about the challenges we're having with the party atmosphere. It's just turned into kind of a festival out there with people just not doing what they need to do. And as we all know, and the county is really pushing this, we have to wear our face coverings, we have to social distance, or we are not getting out of this mess that we're all in. And it's just not happening. Our staff has been, as I mentioned earlier, tracking complaints and issues. We have logged 62 complaints, and that was as of last week. So I don't know what's come in since this report was written and finalized last Thursday. Complaints mostly were about people ignoring face covering and social distancing requirements, and then also complaints about parking, the bicyclists and skateboarders who are zooming through there when they shouldn't, and then adverse impacts to retail. So we brought all this information to the Economic Development Subcommittee in one of our many special meetings that we had to talk about all of this on July 29th. And based on input from the Downtown Business Improvement District and the staff, the ED Subcommittee recommended that we shrink the time period for the closures and starting at 5 a.m. on Saturday to Sunday at 10 p.m. And part of that really was to help the retailers and also just to kind of reduce the time period for people to misbehave. We implemented that for the weekends of August 1st and 2nd, 7th and 8th, and then August 15th and 16th. We had another ED subcommittee meeting on August 12th, and after quite a bit of discussion, the ED subcommittee with staff support recommended that the council consider terminating the pilot street closure program. We all loved trying it. We thought it was a great idea to try, but it's really just turned into too much of a good time out there, and this is not the time for that. People really need to be going to the Avenue to conduct business, not to have just a wonderful party, because they're not doing that safely. As much as we all want that to be able to happen, it's just not safe right now. And so the subcommittee and staff recommended going with a pilot program of parklets. We already have parklets on the side streets. There are some restaurants on the Avenue who have requested parklets. So right now we have a little bit of a challenge because the parklets, once we install them, the barriers are very heavy. We don't move them. So originally the Avenue, restaurants on the Avenue were benefiting and the restaurants off the Avenue weren't, because the Avenue was getting the street closures. And then the restaurants off the Avenue got 7-day-a-week parklets, and the restaurants on the Avenue don't. They only get 2 days of expanding their business. So in order to kind of even all of that out, reduce some of the challenges that we have with people not doing what they need to do, we've recommended going with parklets for all the restaurants who want it. We do believe that if we're going to go down the parklet route, that we should set up some requirements. For example, we think that restaurants need to at least have their tables out and be serving at the parklets no fewer than 3 days a week. We don't want a case where restaurants are just out on like Friday night and Saturday and Sunday, or not until the weekend. And then, you know, these parking spaces and all this space are just unused during the week. We don't want that situation. So we did recommend, and the ED subcommittee recommended, that in order to get a parklet, the restaurants would have to commit to 3 days a week. And that would leave parking spaces open for the restaurants who really couldn't commit to that. Let's see what else. Creation of parklets on Burlingame Avenue will result in 7-day-a-week loss of 60 to 65 parking spaces, assuming that everybody does go along with that and want to participate. That compares to the loss of 150 to 160 spaces during the weekend closures. So fewer spaces, but more days a week for parking loss. And just as an update, as of last week, we had already installed 13 parklets on side streets. I know some of them have done quite a bit to make them look more inviting and attractive, and that is wonderful. We need to make sure that they're safe, but as long as they don't mess with the barriers, then they can do whatever they want really to make them look very nice. And the fire department is looking into what happens during colder weather when folks want to put out tents and have heaters and all of that. And we need to make sure that's done safely. So Councilmember Brownrigg actually brought it up to the fire marshal and the fire chief, and they are looking into that. So we don't have an answer to that question yet. Right now, when it's a gajillion degrees out, we don't have to worry about it. But someday it will get cold again and we will have to worry about that. And so let's see, that is it for the parklets and the street closure. And then we have our general caveat that if things go crazy, if there's safety issues, traffic issues, circulation concerns, in all of this, we reserve the right to make modifications. So putting aside the street closures and switching, that was all really restaurant related. And now we want to switch to personal services. We all know that unfortunately San Mateo County went on the state monitoring list, and we were waiting to see what would happen, and then we stayed on the monitoring list, which meant that we had to deal with additional mandatory business closures effective at 12:01 a.m. on August 2nd. We were really hoping that wouldn't happen. There was a little bit of back and forth with the county and the state, but unfortunately we did land on that list. And we have no idea when we'll get off that list. The health officer, I told the council this, and many of you were on the call last week, that the health officer said it's like the Hotel California. You check into the state monitoring list and you don't check out. And so we just don't know. So for all the businesses who are on here, I'm sorry, we just can't tell you when it's all going to end. We hope soon, but we just don't know. And so businesses that had to close their indoor operations include gyms, personal care services such as hair salons, barbershops, nail salons, massage, et cetera, and then certain offices. And then also there are some restrictions on churches and synagogues and things like that. And so we had been working on providing all these opportunities for outdoor dining because prior to that, these businesses had been allowed to open, not immediately, but they were allowed to open and do indoor service. And so we really hadn't focused on this issue, not thinking that that was something that was going to come our way. And then lo and behold, we ended up on the monitoring list. And so now we've gotten requests from a number of personal services businesses to do their work outside. We have told businesses that have private property, if they have private parking or a private balcony or a deck or something like patio, something like that, that they can do their businesses. They have to follow various regulations that are set out by the state, and those are in your packet. But we don't have city regulations about that. They just have to do it following all the state regulations. But the question is now whether we want to allow them in the public right of way. And so the state has said, and none of these businesses were allowed to operate outside until the state monitoring list started happening. Before our county participated in it, the governor decided, well, we're going to close you all down, but we'll let you have an opportunity to do this outside. And so for a business to do it, they have to follow the state guidelines. And if it's in the public right away, the municipality has to approve. We do have one nail salon that's gone rogue on us on Burlingame Avenue. We are citing them every day that they're out there. We're trying to get them to stop. They have, as of last week, I didn't get a report today, but as of last week, they were not stopping and they're not safe. They are stringing extension cords across the sidewalk, blocking ADA access and whatnot. And so that is an issue that we're continuing to work on. But for everyone else who's waiting and trying to figure out what's happening, we have a number of folks on the meeting tonight who are curious what the city is going to do. So there's lots of jurisdictions that are evaluating how they're going to handle this. Lots, when it first happened, most of them said we're not going to do it at all. And then they're sort of slowly creeping into, well, maybe we'll allow it with certain restrictions. We gave to you in your packet the City of San Mateo's program, just because they're our nearest neighbor, and often folks say, well, you know, San Mateo does this, so why can't Burlingame? Or we want to do, you know, what our neighbors are doing. So we did give to you what San Mateo is allowing, and that's outdoor operations within private parking lots such as shopping centers. We don't have a whole lot of those here, but we do have one. And then in recessed areas of storefronts that don't encroach into a public sidewalk. They have said businesses may not utilize public sidewalks, parklets, or closed streets. And then personal care services may only be performed in outdoor areas of licensed established contiguous with or adjacent to their business premises. They're within 50 feet of outdoor dining. They can only provide services before 11 and only while outdoor dining is not occurring. So they're really worried about, you know, hair blowing all over and into somebody's food, which is icky. They're worried about probably fumes from nail polish or nail polish remover, things like that. There are a lot of challenges. So San Mateo has gone fairly restrictive in what they're allowing or not allowing. State's Department of Consumer Affairs provided further guidance. They have a memorandum to the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, and that is attached, that outlines requirements and guidelines for licensees. So for example, you have to be reasonably proximate if you're allowed out in the public right of way. You have to be reasonably proximate to your licensed establishment. That's not defined what reasonably proximate means. So we'll just interpret that however we want to, I think, but not, you know, not a mile away probably, but in the same, you know, business district. If we decide to do that, we'll consider reasonably proximate. Must be close to public access during period of service. So they want to avoid what we have with the nail salon that's on the avenue where people are, they have chairs on one side of the sidewalk and chairs on the other. And so people are walking through it. That's not allowed. Chemical services, including but not limited to permanent waxing, relaxing, bleaching, tinting, coloring, dyeing, straightening, shampooing, and electrolysis are not allowed outdoors. So folks who want to get a haircut have to come with their hair wet, or you know, have a squirt bottle or something. They can't get a shampoo, they can't get their hair dyed, which of course is a great disappointment to those of us who like to go do that periodically. It's not allowed outside. And then there's a checklist for establishment owners to complete prior to beginning services in an outside setting. That's also in your packet. So as I mentioned, if we have businesses that have private outdoor spaces, we've said, go ahead, you can do it. You just have to follow all the guidelines that the state is setting out and any county health orders, masks, social distancing, all that kind of good stuff. But our question for you all is what you'd like to do for public areas. The Economic Development Subcommittee did talk about this on August 12th. We have the draft meeting minutes attached. A lot of that conversation was really questions and kind of trying to figure out what it's all about. They did not come back with a recommendation because this was such a new area for all of us. So they wanted the matter discussed by the full council in conjunction with the streets and parklets discussion. So one thing that the council may wish to consider is whether you want to have additional parklets that would be available to these personal services businesses. If you are amenable to any of that in the parklets, or perhaps taking a parking lot offline or a part of a parking lot offline and establishing like individual areas that different businesses could use, then we do have some parameters that we thought would be helpful. For example, we would prohibit the use of generators and extension cords, just not safe in our opinion. We don't want anything, going across walkways that would connect to a building and be a tripping hazard. If they're people doing nails, usually you soak your feet in a tub of water, and we would want to make sure that any water is disposed inside the business and not into our storm drains. We also want to make sure that hair is captured and doesn't go into the storm drains. We're really worried about our storm drains and need to make sure that we don't have any problems there. So that's a whole long explanation. If you decide you want to go forward with parklets on Burlingame Avenue, it's about $80,000. And that's in addition to previously approved costs. And we do have some money left over from the funds that we were going to give in the grants through the San Mateo County Strong Fund. We have $40,000 that we had set aside for costs associated with the street closure. And so we could pull that $40,000 over to this. And then we'd go back to the general fund for the rest of it. We would have a monthly loss of parking meter revenue, estimated $15,000 to $20,000 per month. Weekend only loss is $10,000 to $12,000. That's assuming that, parking comes back to the way it was, although it does seem fairly parked up these days. We don't have an estimate as to the cost of procuring barriers for personal services businesses or how much loss of parking revenue there is, because we're just not sure how many would want to participate. It could be, everyone, or it could be, I know the council got an email today from one hair salon that said they just don't see it working out for them. They're on the avenue. So we're just not sure how much that will all cost. We do have a challenge with the barriers. We can't rent anymore. Everybody's trying to rent them. We can't rent anymore. So we'd actually have to purchase the barriers. So there's a little bit of a lead time required. And with that very long explanation, I will stop talking. And again, Syed and Kevin and Joe and Mike are all on the phone to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam City Manager, for the great overview. Huge thanks to staff for being so responsive to all the different community needs and changes. And as we've learned to tweak this stuff, it's been a huge effort. So we really appreciate City Manager Goldman and her whole team for their efforts. And extra special thanks to the Economic Development Subcommittee, who had many special meetings over the summer to continue to have these conversations. So I see that the Vice Mayor has her hand up first. Why don't you go ahead and kick us off with any questions or for staff or comments? Thank you.
Just a question to our city manager. I know there is a concern in regard to hair salons or personal businesses that are located in close proximity to restaurants. So what is the recommendation for distancing? Is it the 50 feet that's mentioned in the staff report, or is there another number that staff would feel more comfortable with?
So the 50 feet is what San Mateo recommended. Right. I think, we don't have a number in mind. I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis, seeing what restaurants are out there or how close they are to a salon. If they can't, so if it's somebody doing haircuts, for example, and they figure out a way to really capture the hair and, keep it contained, then I think you can be relatively closer than, someone who hasn't quite figured that out and you have hair blowing all over the place. if it's a nail salon place, you know, there's fumes associated with that. And I think that's a little distasteful to be having your lunch or dinner next to polish fumes and acetone and all of that. So I don't think that staff has a number in mind per se. If we did go to 50 feet, that will eliminate a lot of opportunities for salons because we have so many restaurants dotted up and down the Ave, and side streets, there's more distancing. But we do have so many restaurants that I think it would be hard to approve a 50-foot distance and actually serve any of these businesses. I think that would be a challenge. So one idea in lieu of that is to take over, you know, area in one of our parking lots and make that kind of a little area. And that way you could, I think, more successfully keep it closed to people passing by. I can't remember the language exactly in the state guidelines, but close to public access during period of service. I think that would be easier. One thing, if you do this, you can have a canopy up, but it has to be open on 3 sides. So if you did do parklets, you know, one thing you could do is have it closed on the sidewalk side and open on the other side. So at least people walking by would not be kind of assaulted with that coming at them.
Okay, and then my other, I would say probably it's a comment rather than a question. Whatever we decide as a council this evening, I do think it's very important that if we have some recommendations in regards to opening up hair salons, nail salons, etc., they should have to develop a plan, a very detailed plan on how they're going to implement opening their business, whether it's the parklets or in the parking lot, and be submitted to the city for review and approval by our staff before moving forward. So then at least if they are not following the plan, we have documentation of what they have decided to do and they have not followed that criteria that they developed. So that is just something I want my colleagues to think about.
Right. Just like with the restaurants, everyone needs an encroachment permit to do work in the public right of way. And so we could make that part of the encroachment permit. I don't have it right in front of me, but there is a checklist that's required by the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. So, you know, at a minimum, they would have to do that. And if we need more information or more requirements, you know, we could certainly look at that.
Okay, great. I think that's all for right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. And before we go on to next questions, I want to just check in with the city manager. And I failed to organize this, at least at the beginning of our discussion. So there's really 3 blocks of things we're discussing here tonight. Broadway, the Burlingame Avenue, the street closures on Broadway, street closures on Burlingame Avenue, and then the personal services. Would you like us, we have a little bit of momentum right now to talk about personal services. We can keep going there. Or would you rather us start with Broadway? I'm sorry, Madam City Attorney, did you have a comment?
Oh, no, please finish that question. And then I did have one, yeah.
Okay, so how would you like us to take this?
If you want to continue down the personal services route, that's fine. I just don't want us mixing areas. I think it would be easier if we stick with one and then finish that out and then go to another one.
I agree. So let's do personal services. What I do want to ask colleagues though, because we have a number of members of the public who probably wish to offer their opinions, let's refrain from offering, just as Vice Mayor did a great job, ask some questions, but let's refrain from offering opinions until we're sure to hear all the public comments on each section. So we'll take public comment on personal services after we ask all of our questions, and then we'll deliberate on it. So
I think it would be helpful if we hear from the city attorney before we go on.
Yes.
In case she's going to tell me I said something wrong.
Nope. Go ahead, Madam City Attorney.
No, I just wanted to, since I am in charge of code enforcement, which is something that, you know, we're all coordinating together on how to respond to these. One thing I want the council to keep in mind if you're considering allowing these personal services, we have limited tools. One of the issues involving the nail salon on Burlingame Avenue that the city manager referred to is that, we have fines which are being imposed, or we have the ability to confiscate and remove property that's encroaching, which is obviously something that we can do, but it is something that we are reluctant to do if we don't have to. I would like the council to consider that if you do allow personal services, that you have a 1 violation and you're done penalty that goes with it, because successive fines are something that can work, but they take time to do. And if we have somebody who's violating our stormwater protections and causing the city to face $20,000 fines because they're dumping something down the storm drain that shouldn't be there, or if there's hair or effluent getting into another business's area where they're trying to do something, we would really like to have the ability to sort of immediately after one offense pull the right to continue in a parklet. It's an extension already to allow folks to do things, and it may be an important thing to a lot of businesses, but I think we also have to build in some more immediate remedies, because the usual code enforcement remedies would take too long to be responsive to the kinds of problems we might encounter.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney. And just to clarify, you're not suggesting 1 strike. It's 1 strike and you're out. So if there's a violation, you no longer have the privilege, is what your recommendation is.
Right. And I would not say that the violations would be for, trivial things, but if they're for issues like health and safety, stormwater, ADA access, creating a tripping hazard across the path of travel for pedestrians, that kind of thing, we really can't spend time dealing with those sort of successive path that we normally do, where we educate and then we fine and then we have an appeal, and then we can't do those things and be effective for the other businesses that are trying to stay alive as well. So it would just be a matter of having that kind of one and done for serious violations. And if you could delegate to staff, if you go forward down this path, if you could delegate to staff the ability to sort of set forth those restrictions and publish them in advance so that people can decide if they want to abide by them when they apply for these permits, then that would be great from an enforcement perspective.
Thank you for that clarification. Councilmember Coulson, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. So first of all, and they're kind of intermixed with everything, so I'm just going to ask them and under the purview of the manicure nail salons. But when the DBID did their survey, did they explain that if you vote to shut down the avenue, the alternative was a parklet? Or was it just, do you like the avenue being closed or not, or open or not, closed to traffic or not?
So I think maybe if we can hold that question, because it's really on the other item, but Jenny is on the call. And so when we get to that issue, okay, maybe we can ask Jenny to answer that.
Well, the only reason I thought it was important now is because I think what we're talking about are parklets for the manicure pedicure places, right?
Right.
I mean, that's one option.
So we could kind of change our direction here and go back to the Burlingame Avenue closure versus parklets question, and then go to salons if you want.
I mean, it seems to me the bigger question is, first of all, are you going to do parklets or not? Because if we decide on the avenue we're not going to do parklets, then it's moot discussion, right?
Right.
I think
well,
that,
it's not if you decide to do anything on a sidewalk, which is tricky. But
yep. So let's. I think Councilmember Coulson's point is a good one. I think there's a better natural order to figure out what are we doing, big picture, both on Broadway and the Avenue. So recognizing that I opened it up to all questions, and so I apologize for regrouping, but it seems to me we should probably go back. It seems to me that we have a recommendation on Broadway.
I still have 2 more questions. Is it okay?
Yeah, but are we going to go, if we're going to go back and have another
Broadway to the end?
Okay.
Just do Burlingame Avenue, like all things Burlingame Avenue, and then go to Broadway afterwards.
Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Coulson.
So the first question is just regarding the structure of the survey, just to understand. And the reason I bring this question up is because I think a number of people who didn't like the avenue closed, when I spoke to them over the last few days, and I think we got some emails today, with the alternative being the parklet, they were less enthusiastic about the parklet, but we can get there. We can hear from the public on this. The second question is, if we allow the parklets, will the restaurants be confined to just the immediate space in front of them and the parklet, or will they be allowed to, you know, like if their next door neighbor is vacant, some restaurants have been sort of shuffling down the way, or their next door neighbor is even a retailer, they're like, I don't care, after 6 o'clock I'm shut, you can do whatever. So I'm just going to assume that we're still going to allow the sidewalk regardless of the answer.
The sidewalks are still allowed. People are not doing proper social distancing between the tables, which is a different challenge, but sidewalk dining is still allowed. In terms of the parklets, I'm going to ask Syed, here he comes. We are allowing the parklets to spread beyond their frontage. Some of them are super narrow, like Velvet 48 is like 3 feet wide. So we're allowing them to spread, provided that they get permission from their neighbors who don't care, if they don't care. But we do, I think, have a limit on how far you can spread. So maybe Syed can weigh in on that.
Right, thank you, Lisa. So the parklets, as Lisa said, we are asking for written permission from the adjacent business to allow that, and we are allowing maybe a 1 to 2 parking spaces more than their frontage. Now, we in the recent last week or a couple of weeks, we have a couple of instances where the people who have previously authorized their neighbor to use parklets, they're coming back and they're saying, no, I don't want it. I want this to be removed now. So it's not easy for us to remove these parklets. So we are dealing with that logistical issue. So people initially said, yes, go ahead and use my frontage. And then we are finding out that they don't like it, you know, as much as they thought they would be okay with it. So, but just to answer your question, yes, we would go as much as about 1 to 2 parking spaces if that's applicable.
Beyond what they have.
And okay, and generally speaking, 1 to 2 parking spaces allows what, 4 tables?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. So 1 parking space would allow maybe 2 additional tables of 4 or 6, and 2 parking spots might allow 4 additional tables if they're 6 feet apart. Diner to diner at the most.
So
And
it depends if you're talking about on the avenue, right? Parallel parking, because the geometry of the side streets is different where it's
Right.
angle parking.
Yes.
right. Right. The side streets on Chapin are deeper, but on the avenue,
Right.
you basically would get like, you know, 2 tables, 8 more diners, and maybe 16 diners at the most if you took 2 or maybe 3 spots if you need to stay 6 feet apart.
And technically, that's all they should be getting during the street closure, because they're not supposed to go further than the edge of the parking space into the street, because the middle of the street, you know, from the edge of the parking space to the edge of the parking space, that's all a fire lane.
Right. Okay.
They're not supposed to be expanding further into the middle of the street.
Right. Okay. And then finally, this is more rhetorical and doesn't have to be answered, but what one of the things the questions I'm struggling with is kind of what are we trying to solve here? And are we trying to solve the fact that people aren't wearing face masks? Are we trying to solve the fact that, you know, restaurants are not putting their tables within, you know, their tables are not 6 feet apart? Or are we trying to solve the parking issue of, because I saw that 40 people said something about they were didn't like the parking. 39 indicated that parking was their main concern, and 10 and other ones, curbside pickup parking was another concern. So I'm going to put 49 in together with parking. So 49 of them said parking is their main concern, and 32 said social distancing and face masking. Because I'm just trying to understand how the difference between a parklet and the avenue being closed how do we anticipate that would solve the face covering and the social distancing? I get the face covering. I don't know. And I don't have to have it answered. I think maybe if we have the conversation, it will come about.
I actually do want to weigh in on that a little bit. What we're seeing is that when the street is closed, people are walking down the middle of the street and then they're stopping by the folks sitting at the tables and they're having a big party and a big conversation on all of that. And so it's just providing a lot of opportunity for a lot more socializing. And believe me, I'm a social person and I wanted desperately to be able to do that as well. But when people are socializing like that, they're not maintaining a distance. There's just a lot less room for all of that to go on. And so people won't do it as much if you don't have that street open in the middle. You're just not going to have the number of people just kind of hanging out that you have right now if you keep the street closed and go to the parklets.
Okay, that's the assumption we're making.
That's the assumption.
So when you look at this thing, if I may, Broadway and Burlingame Avenue have this street closures, but there's a distinct difference between them. Broadway somehow is not a destination place.
Yeah.
They're at Burlingame Avenue. And so there's a lot more people coming to Burlingame Avenue. And there's not enough space to accommodate everyone. And there is obviously the fire lane, and then the sidewalks are full of people, as well as the tables and chairs. So there's just a lot of people, and that is causing the problem. So now, if you open up the street, then that would create a different atmosphere. It will not as much party type of invitation when you close the street. So that's where the premises is in terms of trying to prevent that party-like atmosphere.
Okay, and I assume then that we feel comfortable that if we close down Burlingame Avenue, I guess we're assuming those people are not going to simply move over to Broadway.
So we'll see. We don't think so. A lot of the people we think are coming from elsewhere and not even necessarily spending money in Burlingame. It's just like a fun place to come. I don't know if the council recalls, but you got a kind of a nasty email from someone who came down from San Francisco, a city and county that was on the watch list, came down to Burlingame to visit their friends in their house, which they're not supposed to do when we were not on the watch list. Then they strolled over to Burlingame Avenue to just stroll up and down and not actually buy anything, not go to any of the restaurants, not do anything, to spend money in Burlingame. And then they strolled on back and then yelled at us for people not wearing face coverings. So I think you're going to reduce that kind of, hey, this is just a great place to go hang out. And you'll just have people who are actually going to transact business, or fewer people that are going to just hang out. More people that are there to transact business, whether that's sitting at a restaurant or picking up takeout food or going in and buying something in this retail shops.
Okay, and I just think, and this is the last sort of questiony thing, but I think just my follow-on question, which we can get to when we talk about Broadway, is, then if in fact people did migrate to Broadway and Broadway ended up in the same situation as Burlingame Avenue, of course, then they would be subject to the same, the closure that Burlingame Avenue had.
We'd have to bring that to the council. Yeah. I mean, Broadway is less time for people to just be strolling around, right? Because the closure starts later on a Saturday. But yeah, we'd have to come back and talk to the council and say, hey, unfortunately, we have the same problem in Broadway. And, we'd like to take care of it.
Okay.
I mean, none of us want to be the Debbie Downer here, but what we're finding is that people are just really not doing what they need to do to socially distance, to wear their masks, to get us out of this problem that we're in.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I can comment more about my own observations over the last 2 weeks on the weekend, because I spent about 6 hours down there this last Sunday, but I'll save that for when we have more discussion after public comment. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. I'll turn it over to Councilmember Brownrigg for some questions. It'd be great if we could kind of keep things focused on Burlingame Avenue. But if you have other questions as well.
I appreciate that, Madam Mayor. I do think the Vice Mayor had her hand up before I did. So I do want to defer to her if she if she'd like to speak before.
Well, the reason I called on you is because the Vice Mayor already had a chance to ask some questions. So I'm just rotating through, and then we'll go to Vice Mayor O'Brien next.
All right, fair enough. Well, actually, in a way, I'm drafting behind Councilwoman Coulson, and I do want to start by saying I do thank the Economic Subcommittee and staff for putting a lot of time and effort into this. And maybe this is how Councilwoman Coulson feels, I'm playing a little bit of catch up to all of this, not serving on the Economic Subcommittee, not getting that kind of testimony from shopkeepers and stuff, relying on the staff report that I read a few days ago and the input from that, and my own experiences. So I guess my thought experiment is this, maybe for the city manager. If everybody on Burlingame Avenue was wearing masks, would we be proposing to change our street closure protocols?
So if everyone was wearing masks and socially distancing, then our challenge would be the complaints about the bikers and the skateboarders, which the cops have already gone out and talked to them, and the retailers who are complaining about it. So we still have challenges that are not just related to face coverings and social distancing.
And I think this is what Councilwoman Coulson was trying to get at. It is important, I think, to try to figure out what we're solving. Because if we're solving mostly masks and distancing, and we haven't tried enforcement, which we haven't, then that might be a path to take before changing the rules. If, on the other hand, the reason we're changing the rules is actually we don't like closing the road because it's hurting retailers, then that's a different conversation. So that's why I think it's, at least for me, important to understand what are we trying to achieve.
I think we have a multi-pronged problem, which is why it's difficult to talk about it all. We have a problem with social distancing and masks. That's one of the prongs. We have a challenge with the skateboarders and the cyclists who are crashing into people. And the police were out last weekend, and the community response team was out talking to 3 different groups of kids, from what I understand. And then we also have a problem with retailers who are telling us that this is not helping them, that it is in fact hurting their business. So you have 3 different things that are byproducts of this closure.
Right, and I'll let it go at this because I want to get the input from the public and colleagues. But, against those 3 negatives are a lot of activity, I think, for restaurants and people on the avenue. And, part of the effort, the reason we closed the avenue was to help our businesses survive. So, this whole public policy issue, COVID is a series of trade-offs that we have to make. So that, I'm just trying to understand where we see the priorities and, the downside. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I will say, and I take your point. I mean, from my observation, and I'm not there as often as you all are, because I've been out of town a little bit, but the restaurants that have parklets that are on the side streets are doing very well with their parklets. I see them full. So I don't think that the fact of having a parklet versus a street closure is necessarily going to be a huge negative on the restaurants. Now, I'm not a restaurateur, and there are, I'm sure, some who are on this meeting tonight who may have a different opinion, but I am seeing lots of people at Stella. I'm seeing lots of people at Coconut Bay and at Park and Howard and other parklet restaurants. So I don't think that you will get no people, but sure, fewer people will come downtown because they can't just go out and have a big party on the Ave. Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam City Manager. I see Vice Mayor O'Brien has her hand up. Go ahead.
My question actually was related to Kathleen's spiel on the violations. So the question I have is, if it's a one-time violation, you're out, what happens if the business still doesn't adhere to the rules?
Well,
which leads
it's
to my next question of, can you take their business license away?
We have in the code an existing business license revocation procedure, which involves a hearing in front of the council. So that is probably the method that we would take for that ultimate kind of sanction. The first part of this is that it would be useful in processing these applications and getting people set up to do the work on either sidewalks or in parklets. And on Burlingame Avenue, there is width enough there to do some personal services on the sidewalk in the same sort of slice that restaurants use. It would be useful when we're setting up these permits to be able to tell them that there's a zero tolerance policy for, you know, health and safety and stormwater issues, and that their right to do that will be immediately revoked if they're caught doing that. So it's useful kind of on the front end as a deterrent. If the deterrent doesn't work and we end up pulling their right to be there, and then they persist in being there anyway, then it is that sort of enforcement policy question of, do we then forcibly, you know, confiscate materials that are encroaching on the right of way illegally and force them out, or do we engage in some other form of enforcement? You know, at some point we need to be able to physically remove people. We've been reluctant to go there if we don't absolutely have to for life safety reasons, because these are, you know, before the council's had an opportunity to weigh in on this policy question, we didn't want as staff to preempt that issue. But it is something that's available to us as a penalty. We would really rather not, if we can help it, increase the number of incidents in which we have members of our police force and our public works crew going in and physically removing obstructions, but that is an option if we have to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Ortiz has his hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I figured I'd try my turn at leading questions. So the question I have is, were there any complaints about large congregations of people standing closer than 6 feet without face masks before the closure of the street?
Before the closure, not on the avenue. Certainly we get complaints in the parks.
Okay, but the avenue specifically was not a problem.
Correct. Not
Okay,
that I'm aware of.
that's going to be my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. I don't see colleagues have their hands up for additional questions. Just one clarification to the city manager. You'd mentioned that if we move to parklet for restaurants sort of throughout the downtown, that the thought on the Economic Development Subcommittee was requiring 3 days of usage in order to get one. That could just be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where really they're only using it on the weekend, versus during the week, a whole parklet would be taking up parking spaces but not being used. Was there any thought to asking for weekdays or maybe more than 3 days? And I think Councilmember Ortiz it looks like he has maybe speaking for the...
I'll just give you my view of what we were thinking of at the Economic Development Subcommittee. When we were talking about this originally, I was very much opposed to parklets, because I went to San Mateo and found that there was a number of parklets that were sitting there empty. And so my concern was that we were doing away with a lot of parking spaces that were not, for parklets that were not being used. So that is one of the ways that we were trying to come up with a way to ensure that these parklets are going to be used. And if they're not, then we can remove them. And so that's where the thought came for that.
I certainly understand that. My question, I guess,
We weren't specific on the subcommittee about which particular days. I had suggested 4. The subcommittee said, let's go with 3. And we didn't say must be 1 weekday, 2 weekend days or anything.
Okay. All right. So the committee thought about it, considered more than 3 days, but came with the recommendation to maybe consider 3. Okay.
I said 4 just to make it, more than half, but
right.
There's no magic in the number. We just wanted to make sure that we don't put them out there and have people not use them and say, I'm only going to do Saturday night dinner, and then we've taken away the parking for all this time.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councilmember Coulson has her hand up again. Go ahead.
Quick question. So on the parklet installations, we're assuming that we're assuming everyone's compliant and good, that these would remain in place until the pandemic, restaurants were allowed to be inside, have inside dining again.
or whenever the council inside dining, or perhaps the council will say, well, they get inside dining, but they only get to have 25% of capacity. So
Oh, that's right. Okay. So in other words, these parklets could be here for well over a year. If we're going to be going, at least I'm guessing, I'm thinking it's going to be a while. So for me, this is probably through the winter and
Right.
stretch through.
yeah, I
So-
don't think it's going back to normal times anytime soon, but it's really up to the council. If you say, what restaurants are able to get some capacity inside, so we don't want to do it anymore, then that's up to you.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, do we have any other questions for staff or subcommittee members before we open it up to public comment on this particular item? And we'll stay focused on sort of Burlingame Avenue issues.
Just the closures, not the personal services.
Yes, the closures, not the personal services. Thank you. Okay, then seeing no questions on the Burlingame Avenue closures, let's open it up to public Councilmember Brownrigg. I see your hand just went up before I do that. Go ahead.
Just very quick, Madam Mayor, I would appreciate if members of the public, if they have a few extra seconds in their remarks, if they address this question of is this mostly a mask and safety issue, or is there a different set of issues? Because again, if it is mostly mask and safety, then there are another set of tools we can use. So I would just appreciate hearing members of the public, if they don't mind, they express their view about what's the priority for them as they address this issue. So thank you.
And I see, thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. Councilmember Coulson, did you have a final question or comment?
So I never did figure out or understand when the DBID, and maybe they can answer it during their opportunity to speak, but on the DBID, I guess the concern I guess I just want to make sure that the retailers understand that, they do express a very grave concern about parking. I personally am not as concerned because I see a lot of parking out there, but I would really, if Jenny has an opportunity to talk about it, or no, in the survey, did they sort of say, if we shut down the street and close the street because of social distancing and max, the alternative is we will take the parking away and make sure that people will get parklets instead, and we'll solve it that way. I'm just not sure that the structure of the survey, based on the conversations I had with a number of retailers today, they did not understand that was the and or if or scenario. So I just love to hear from you.
Jenny, you're muted.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. At this point, we'll go ahead and open it up to public comment, and we'll see, Madam City Clerk, who's first up.
If we could have Jenny go first, I think, since that question is pending right now.
Is that good? Yeah, so no, it was not a question. We used Mayor Beach's survey, and then we sent out another one and had absolutely no reference to parklets whatsoever. It was just basically, do you want to, the council has extended the road closure on weekends through the end of September. And then, how do you feel about it? And we encroached that. And the majority felt, but I think when this was first put into place, you didn't say it was a majority rule kind of decision. You said if there were enough people that were negatively affected, then you would revisit it. And there were there were quite a few. I think there were 34 in the first survey, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, that were against it. Again, the majority said they wanted to extend it through September, but there were several businesses, and I think it was 34, 35, that said it was absolutely hurting their business. So that's something for you all, but no mention of parklets whatsoever in the survey. Does that answer your question?
And no mention that if we close the avenue down, the alternative would be parklets with 50% of the parking gone.
Nope.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
So
I actually think
So-
that's a flaw in the survey, and I'm just going to say that, but
I'm sorry, say that again?
I think that's a flaw in the survey, but
We were discussing it at the time. I mean, we used Emily's survey and we didn't even think parklets was a thing. I mean, when the survey was done, parklets were not even a thing on the side avenues, on the side streets. So we can absolutely figure out the parklets. We had a meeting, and Andrew can talk about this. We had a meeting with a contractor to see how to make parklets more attractive while staying, just thinking if we do it, the people will probably want them more attractive, like stacks. Yeah, I mean, I agree. The information we have no feedback officially regarding parklets and losing parking. All we know is parking was a main concern, the lack of parking.
could I just,
Okay, actually, thank you. Hold on, Councilor Brown. So there's some discussion of the mayor's survey. I had an inquiry on that. I just want to clarify for the record what that is. I do a constituent newsletter and asked probably around the 20th or so of July, before any parklet discussions, what do people think of the avenue? Just like over the years, I've asked questions, which community center design do you like? Do you want a Topgolf or an ice rink? Kind of general questions. And I couched that survey as unofficial, unscientific, and non-city sponsored. So it was kind of humorous. So I just, I think Ms. Kelleher is referring to the mayor's survey, and there just a constituent, feedback tool of interest. Only 30 people responded, and I was very surprised, because that's for all the emails we were receiving on liking or disliking the avenue closure. I think that was even before, I forget if it was before or after Broadway closure based on the timing, but surprised that not a whole lot of people responded. It was unscientific, it was non-city sponsored, there's no, and most people, most regular constituents liked it and were very concerned about face coverings and social distancing, and wanted people to be fined for violations. Those are the major takeaways, but about 25% of the people, but that's just, so when we're talking about the mayor's survey, I just want you to know it's very informal, and I'm not sure, I did not ask the Business Improvement District to forward it. I wasn't even aware that you did. So if you formed a different survey or utilized it, I had no part in that.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. Because we wanted to compare apples to apples. So I shouldn't have said that. We didn't say this is Emily's survey, Mayor Beach's survey. We took what you asked and we put it in our own survey so that you'd be able to do apples to apples. Otherwise, you'd be we all wanted to know the same thing, right? We wanted to know who's for this. Is it only affecting the restaurateurs? What are the other people? Does it affect, the people on Burlingame Avenue more than the side streets, blah, blah, blah. So you had some great starting points, but we didn't say this is, we couched it as we would like you to answer these questions. And we got 81 is when I sent the responses to you all, but we got almost 100 total, but the percentages stayed the same, that the majority said, yes, it was a good thing, but only through September. We didn't say, we just said through September, which is what it was. And then it was surprising because, like you said, we have heard so many people complain, vociferously complain, and I'm sure you guys are used to this. We're not as much. Everybody hates it, and this is horrible, and all the businesses, blah, blah, blah. And then when we got the survey back, that's not what it showed. So it was kind of interesting. But parking was big.
All right, so we appreciate your input. We have public comment going on right now because Ms. Kelleher represents the Business Improvement District. I see some hands up and would like to give my colleagues an opportunity briefly to, if you could, Ms. Kelleher, keep answers pretty succinct because we got to get to other public comments, but I want to give because we gave Councilmember Coulson the opportunity to ask you direct questions. Councilmember Brownrigg, followed by Vice Mayor O'Brien.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and I do appreciate bending the time rules because this is relied on by the staff report and the ESD, I think, this survey. So I'm just trying to understand, and I don't want to get bogged down in process, but I'm trying to understand it was the same survey questions just issued to two different groups of people? Is that it? And how do we know whether it matters or not? People are filled it out twice, or did we try to?
So Ms. Kelleher, I don't think we had exactly the same questions because my informal constituent survey didn't ask if it was hurting your retail business or helping. So I think you must have, did you send a link to my survey and then asked your own set of questions? Can you please clarify that?
Yeah, because you're asking somebody who did this a little while ago. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. We had a separate survey.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
And then you sent a link to mine. Is that what you did? Or, because I don't think you asked my questions based on the data in the staff report.
Let's see. So oh my God, I will have to get back to you. Didn't I send you all the responses, the spreadsheet?
I mean, there was one email, again, I don't know how much it is profitably going to process, but there was one email where you guys forwarded the mayor's questionnaire and said, please finish this. Please answer it. And then you did a different one on top of that?
Absolutely. We did a different one. So that one was to, like Mayor Beach said, that one was open to everybody. We didn't have privy to the answers to that, right? That was all that we were just trying to share that. And then we made our own survey just for the businesses. And that's the information that I gave to you.
I see, thank you.
That's the one that Lisa, gave those numbers. That was DBID specific survey.
So I'm just looking back at my emails and what we got from you, Jenny, was just the results from the 81 restaurants, but not the questions.
Exactly. Yeah, that was just DBID.
And then you sent us some comments as well. For example, Francesca Sixto said stop street closure, parklets for restaurants on the avenue.
Right.
There were some other ones from someone from the flower shop, masks should be worn at all times. People are still walking around without masks. So there's those kind of comments.
Right, those were the comments, but those.
Yeah, and then we don't have the actual questions.
No, those were just the general comments
right.
about how they felt. And right. Yeah, so I'm sorry if I confused you. So the numbers, that 81 responses, those were from our business survey.
Right.
And those were the ones that the majority said that they would like to continue it through September. But again, we had absolutely no reference to parklets at that stage. We didn't know that was a thing.
Okay, so I think that answers Councilmember Coulson's question about the parklet, whether that was an either or. Vice Mayor O'Brien, did you have a question for Ms. Kelleher? We'll give you that opportunity as well.
Well, I think it was somewhat answered. So when you say you did your survey with the downtown businesses, how many of those questions were the same as Mayor Beach's questions?
I could send you the questions. The questions were, let me see if I have the questions in front of me. Hold on. Sorry, I know you're in.
I'm just wondering if there was a difference in those questions, because if those questions were already asked once from Mayor Beach, which had nothing to do with the businesses, and you took that survey for your businesses, did you add questions to that? Or, I mean, was the majority of that survey your own questions? Was the majority of the survey more of Mayor Beach's questions? I mean, what was it?
Okay, real fast. I represent a downtown restaurant retailer service. My business is located on Burlingame Avenue on one of the side streets downtown. the street closure has helped my business, not helped my business, not affected my business. My concerns regarding the street closure are parking, where are the rule followers, the non-compliance for masks and social distancing, lack of loading or unloading, and then what do you propose? Those were the survey questions. So it was very, who are you? What kind of business? Where are you located? Has it helped? Has it hurt? Has it not affected you at all? What are your
Okay, so they were different questions than Mayor Beach's questions. That's my bottom line question here.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that clarification question. We're going to move on to other public comments, and members of the public, thank you for understanding. I think we have a number of you tonight and lots of issues. We're going to limit public comment to 2 minutes at this point on this item. And we'll see if the city clerk has anybody who wishes to speak.
Mayor Beach, I have a couple chats that are pretty general about Avenue and parklets, and one email that's very general. So I'll read those at this time. So there's one question: if a restaurant is not utilizing their parklets every day, can a neighboring restaurant use those parklets when not in use, since the city of Burlingame is subsidizing the parklets? I then have a comment, a Zoom chat that states, the street closure has been wonderful for the community, restaurants, and retailers. From the many folks I've spoken with, they really enjoy having someplace to go and be outside with their families. The city should enforce the mask wearing requirements rather than taking away the one thing people look forward to every week. Issue tickets, do whatever is in your right, but it is your responsibility to enforce the rules. As far as retailers complaining, frankly, I'm sick of it. There's plenty of parking available near Burlingame Ave. I'm sorry people are inconvenienced by having to walk a few blocks. What a shame. Those complaining are so self-absorbed that they cannot sacrifice a little exercise to save our local independent businesses. We should not be making decisions to appease the group. And then I do have one email about street closure. Good evening. In the staff report for the street closure pilots, there is some indication that complaints around bicycles and skateboarders have been made. While it doesn't seem to be a primary concern, it does point to one important fact. Burlingame residents are needing safe spaces for these types of activities, and our council has not stepped up to provide them. Many cities nearby have implemented safe streets. I personally bike to these neighboring cities to enjoy them, and it's been so warming to see the amount of families and young people using slow streets to stay happy and healthy and carefree. I'm once again asking you to reconsider and roll out the Slow Street program if council and staff can stomach the criticism of possibly perpetuating the spread of COVID in order to keep businesses alive. Based on the general sentiment online, it seems like whatever criticism or concern exists for slow streets could also be stomached. I'd also like to point out an issue of equity here. Walking or biking in a neighborhood like Easton Addition is not the same as walking or biking in neighborhoods east of El Camino. And then I don't see any hands raised to speak on this general matter.
Megan.
Do you see one?
Looks like we have 2, yep.
So we'll go with Sam because I read John Kavranian's question unless we want to. So Sam.
Thank you for taking my comment. I'll make it quick. I have a general comment and then I do have a question to follow up. I think the initial purpose of opening or closing the Burlingame Avenue over the weekend was to sort of help small businesses and overcome the challenges faced with COVID. And I think it has served that purpose, especially for restaurants. I believe restaurants do drive traffic into the avenue, which helps out retailers at the same time. My concern is that by opening up Burlingame Avenue again and just setting up parklets, it will act as a deterrent to patrons to visit the avenue, and in turn hurt business for retail stores and also for restaurants. My question is, I understand that sort of putting a limit on how many parking spaces a store can take and build a parklet is a way of leveling the playing field. But has the council factored in, regular seating occupancy? A restaurant can have, 150 on a regular day versus a small restaurant has 20. And I think it's kind of unfair if they both have the same amount of availability with parklets. I'll go on mute and I'll listen to your response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abbasi. We appreciate your input. We'll take public comment. Mr. Kavranian, we are taking public comment on Burlingame Avenue, but you're welcome to, if you have a public comment, you've got 2 minutes on this item.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. I just want to make a comment. On Broadway, we are working well with the outdoor dining and the road closure. My recommendation would be to do the same days as Broadway, close Burlingame Avenue from Saturday 4 p.m. to Sunday 10 p.m. Retailers can do their business Friday and Saturday during the day, and give opportunity for the restaurants to have their evenings on Saturday and all day Sunday. Retailers right now can have customers come in and shop inside the stores where restaurants are deprived of that opportunity. And my recommendation would be just copy what Broadway's doing with the hours and days, and keep the road closure for Burlingame Avenue to help these restaurants. Once the rainy season comes, you can't have indoor or outdoor dining. It's going to devastate the businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Do we have any other members of the public who'd like to raise their hand, or you can email a chat, or you can, if you're dialing in by phone, you can dial *9 on your telephone and we'll know you want to raise your hand. We'll give everybody one last chance.
I don't
see. All right, then seeing none, we'll close public comment at this time. And this is the time in the meeting where we are going to stay focused on Burlingame Avenue street closure, but we get a chance to deliberate and share our perspectives and where we think we need to go with this. So I'm looking for a raised hand feature. Which of my colleagues here would like to start us off? Councilmember Ortiz, go ahead, your hand's up first.
Thank you. Again, because I am part of the Economic Development Subcommittee, I've been struggling with this, and we've had many conversations. When we first thought about this and people were arguing in favor of parklets, I was very much opposed to the closure, to parklets, and I in favor of the closure. Having the county go back on the watch list, I'm convinced that we need to do our part in the city of Burlingame to avoid creating situations where we can promote the spread of the COVID. I think we've created a carnival environment on Burlingame Avenue that encourages the flaunting of the rules. There are no masks worn. There are large groups of people of all ages. The tables are set apart that in a way that are not 6 feet apart. I don't see our police officers walking up and down the street giving out tickets to a large number of people not wearing masks. So I am convinced that we need to stop the closures and move to parklets. Now, parklets have their own problems, which includes the permanent elimination of parking as long as this program goes on. But the parklets are working well. They in the side streets where the restaurants have the parklets, they're working really well. I think that we can make it happen. When we opened when we closed the avenue, the idea was to help most of all. It really wasn't much to help everybody else. It was the restaurants that were suffering because they didn't have enough room or a controlled environment to set their tables. And I think we've done that, but I think that the consequences went far beyond that. And I think the parklets will still help these restaurants to be able to serve people outdoors and continue to do this while we're closed. Once the rains come, once it's cold outside, I don't know how much the restaurants can do to make it comfortable outside for diners. So I don't think we have a huge window of time here. Once the rains come, I think a lot of the restaurants will choose not to put their tables out. The parklets will then be eliminated because they won't meet the requirement of being 3 days a week. But from now to then, I think we need to, and I'm very much in favor of stopping the closures and moving to parklets. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz, and we appreciate both your work and Vice Mayor O'Brien's work on the Economic Development Subcommittee this summer. Councilmember Brownrigg, go ahead. Your hand is up next.
I'd just like to ask both Councilman Ortiz and Vice Mayor Keegan, who had to wrestle with this in the Economic Subcommittee, what was the discussion about enforcement, about giving people tickets? And I'll just share, I mean, I've just come back from a city outside of our state where mask wearing was about 99.5%, and the 0.5% were people who supported President Trump. And everybody else was wearing, and probably a whole lot of Trump supporters too, they were all wearing masks. And that place gave tickets. So I guess I just wonder, as you wrestled with this, what you thought about trying an enforcement approach first, rather than changing the program as a whole.
I'll give you my opinion. I don't know that this was the consensus of the subcommittee, but my opinion again has to do with using our police force to run around issuing tickets to try to get that compliance. I don't know how effective that would be, but where I come down on this is we have created a situation that encourages the bad behavior. And so for that respect, I say we need to end the situation that we've created. And I'm convinced that we made a mistake by doing the closure.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. Councilmember O'Brien, would you like to respond to Councilmember Brownrigg's question?
Yes. So I think this is the reason why we're here this evening is we did try opening up closing the street to see what would happen. And we saw what happened. And there has been, I do think there has been an improvement with the wearing of the masks. However, there is quite an increased socialization aspect. And, you know, technically, according to the guidelines, both the county and the state, you know, you're supposed to have these tables 6 feet apart. You're supposed to not seat more than 6 people within a household, so you don't have the socialization. Well, that's not exactly what's happening. People are coming up to these tables and socializing, and not all of them have masks. Now, I see a bigger problem actually lately with the younger constituents, the preteens, the teenager and young adults not wearing the masks, and they're in bigger groups, which is even worse. And then you have the people riding the bikes and using the skateboards, which they're not supposed to. So, you know, I kind of feel that we gave them the opportunity to follow the regulations, and they're not following them. And I know, Councilmember Brownrigg, your question is enforcement. And so, you know, there's the split with the community too on how they look at that. You know, some are saying the police should not be giving out these tickets. Some are saying they shouldn't be out enforcing it. It should be other people enforcing it. You know, I think we've had presence from our police department, which I really appreciate, but I'm not sure if people are changing their behaviors just because of that. Broadway, on the other hand, we've closed it and they've done a very good job. It's not that same gathering atmosphere. And I do think, at least from the times I've been on Broadway versus the times I've been in Burlingame Avenue, I think Broadway actually is following the rules much better than Burlingame Avenue. And at some point we have to put our foot down. There is the other aspect of the retailers. I think there's 29 businesses that say they were hurt by the street closures. So we tried one way. It doesn't appear to be working for many people. So is it worth looking at another option? Our numbers in the county caused us to go on that watch list. And I don't particularly want to be on that watch list for a long time period. Now, we don't necessarily have all the control over that either. But at least with parklets, it also gives the opportunity for retailers to utilize parklets if they want to. Now, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the side streets that have been using parklets appear to be doing well. So if someone can answer that question, are they doing well with those parklets? And are they experiencing those same issues? I don't think they are from my observation in regard to heavier social gatherings, but I may be wrong. So I would like a response to that. But I am a little disappointed though, and about the survey. I wish, and this may have been my fault, that I didn't see the questions. I had thought maybe the businesses were a little more informed about the potential parklet option. And so that concerns me a little bit in this discussion, that they maybe weren't given all the information to make kind of that educated decision on how to answer questions. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Vice Mayor O'Brien. I see Councilmember Coulson and Ortiz have their hands up. Let's go to Councilmember Coulson next, and then we'll go to Councilmember Ortiz again.
I think he had a quick question. I don't know. You want to ask that, Councilman Ortiz?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Councilmember Coulson, it's my comment, and it just because we keep talking about the fact that the parklets were not mentioned in the survey. But if the restaurants understood that they had that option for the parklets versus just no closure and nothing else, they may have had a different answer too. So when we talk about the parklets were not included in there, the restaurateurs may have had a different answer if they knew that that was an option versus nothing at all.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. Go ahead, Councilmember Coulson.
Thank you, Mayor Beach. So I at this point, I am kind of warming up to the idea of the parklets, but I want to be very clear here. I was on the Avenue from 10 a.m. on Sunday until 4 p.m. And I feel very strongly that the people that I saw there were generally in compliance with the mask wearing. And I, maybe it was raining, the weather was crazy, who knows what was different, but my observations having been down there that day were that people were generally complying. So I'm not making this decision as a punitive measure for people who were or were not complying. I'm also, I've yet to see evidence that, and this would have been helpful in the survey, is, how many restaurants have had their employees that have reported that they've contracted COVID, or their patrons have contracted COVID, or if we had that data from the county from contact tracing, which I don't think they're even doing. So I want to make decisions based kind of on hard data. And I just don't see the data that the Avenue closure has spread COVID. But at any rate, I understand that the businesses don't like having it closed. And just to Mr. Kavranian's point, I think he maybe is unaware that we actually have moved those two to the Burlingame closure and the Broadway closure are coordinated right now, and they have been for like 3 weeks. So we are on the same schedule. And the response I got back from the several of the retailers was, now that Friday is open and Saturday is open, we are in really good shape. So I think the experience they've had is getting Friday off and Saturday off has really helped a lot of the retailers. But I would like to offer the restaurants a chance to have additional outside dining 7 days a week. And I know it's going to mean that we're going to sacrifice some parking, but I think that I see lots of parking in the outer parking lots. So I think we can sacrifice a little bit of parking for the restaurants to be open 7 days a week. And it will allow them to make investments in their parklets if they know, if they know that they will be able to keep them, throughout COVID. I actually think they'll probably be able to have outdoor seating and outdoor dining through most of the winter. I know Stacks is generally open on the weekends through the whole winter unless it's pouring rain, as an example. So I think they will hopefully be able to use them through the winter. They can make an investment in something that is more attractive for the avenue and the appearance is good. And maybe we will get the added benefit of not as many people congregating. My concern is that if we do this, that the skateboarders and the bike riders in particular will migrate over to Broadway, and then Broadway will have the same problem. So I would like to make sure if we do that, that we enforce that on Broadway and we do ticket. And I would actually just say, you have to walk your bike when the street is closed, and skateboards, walk your bike and your skateboard. You can skateboard down, bike down, but then you have to walk on the street as opposed to riding, where I think you get pedestrians and bikers and skateboarders all put together. I see Lisa.
If I could just respond. So with Burlingame Avenue, we actually closed that at 5 a.m. on Saturday. It's not open during the day. So
Oh, okay, sorry.
Saturday to 10 p.m. on Sunday. So it's just slightly different than what's going on Broadway. The other thing, I share your concern a little bit about the bikers and the skateboarders, but not entirely. And I think the difference there is that the cross streets are open. So you don't have 3-block long, speedway to go crazy on. You have to stop at each block because the side streets are open. And the reason we had to keep the side streets open is because we have all those one ways, in the Broadway area. And so if you close it down, it's just a complete catastrophe, versus in Burlingame Avenue, we closed the intersections because Public Works staff was concerned that people would just be walking and kind of not paying attention and get clipped.
Right.
So it's just a little bit of difference with the geography. And so I don't know that, who knows, kids will do what kids will do, but I think it's not quite as clear cut that they will just migrate over to Broadway.
Okay. So and maybe they won't, but if they do, I think we
need to make sure the police are out dealing with, because we don't want to just, take one problem from one business district and transfer it to the other. If I may, I did want to ping off of one thing you said, which is restaurants investing in their parklets. And it's something I neglected to mention, is that I did get contacted from one restaurateur who really wanted, now this restaurateur may or may not have wanted the street closure, but I said, you don't get the street closure and a parklet 7 days a week. And this person wanted a parklet 7 days a week and to really build it out and make it nice and, preparing for colder weather. And I said, well, it's one or the other. You can't have both right now. That's not what we're offering. And so I think there are restaurateurs who they haven't decided to make the investment in the parklets because that wasn't a thing that they could do. But now if the council goes this direction, they will know that they can actually, do something nicer that will go into the cooler months and be something that they can, continue with. Whereas, it's going to be hard for them if the street is closed only 2 days a week for them to really haul out all the, nicer, warmer stuff and then haul it back in.
Right. I totally and 100% agree. So sort of I think I'm getting to the same answer as the vice mayor, as our economic subcommittee is recommending. It's just, I think my rationale is more focused on the benefit for the restaurateurs to be able to make these investments and get through the colder weather as we approach and be open 7 days a week for more dining experiences, as opposed to sort of my personal observations that the people were completely uncompliant and not done. So it doesn't really matter. I'm getting to the same spot. It's more there. My bigger concern is if we put these parklets up, there was some mention by one, I think Mr. Abbasi said, if you have a bigger restaurant, you should get more spaces. But I also want to be sensitive and thoughtful to the fact that, our clothing retailers and our other hard goods retailers, they're also paying rent in the city and they pay high rents. And while they can be open with minimal shopping, a very small number of people coming in and there's big lines, I don't want to, completely get rid of all the parking on the Ave. If we were to do that, then we should just shut the Ave down and let them be permanent. So, I'm balancing that a little bit. I'm sorry, it's not exactly 100% fair that you get one one spot and you get 5, but I think, you know, whether it's 2 or 3 based on your area and your space, it's fair. And some, I do understand, are going to have to, if they have a bulb out in front of them, they're going to have to go to the left or to the right. But I hope we can work with the retailers who, it sounds like, according to Syed, some are reporting back that they thought they wanted the parklet in front, or it was going to be okay. Now they're not okay with it. So that's my commentary. And thank you very much, Economic Subcommittee, for your work.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. Councilmember Brownrigg, do you have a comment before I share mine?
Is it your intention, Madam Mayor, that we're going to vote on Burlingame Avenue and then go to the other 2 segments? Is that it?
Yes, I think we should probably do is, as the city manager recommended, take one thing at a time. Let's figure out what we're doing as far as street closure or parklets on the avenue, and then probably makes sense to roll into personal care services because we're still talking about the avenue. Then we can go back and see if the recommendation is okay about Broadway.
Well, then I appreciate your invitation, and I'll quickly lay out my view. And I'm going to, I believe, be a vote of dissent. Not because I don't appreciate the hard work and the trade-offs that the Economic Subcommittee and staff had to make in making their recommendation. I just feel that, well, first of all, I start from a place that says, I think it's really neat that people are coming to Burlingame Avenue. I wish they were doing it safely. So I think it is to our benefit collectively that we have a place for people to stroll and bike and do these things, but they need to be doing it safely. And so, you know, I look at the surveys, the majority likes it. And therefore, you know, my preference would be to try to enforce a mask wearing regime and a distancing regime rather than just throw in the towel and say, well, we've got to give up. I am also, frankly, not at all convinced that having restaurants in parklets and on sidewalks, you're not going to still have the very same issue with people walking along the sidewalk talking to people that they see. So I'm not really convinced that this will make a marked difference in safety. It will do other things. Having said all that, so I'll be a vote of dissent, mostly because I think we should try enforcement first. I will say that I completely agree with Councilman Ortiz that this is really a 3 to 4 week choice, because as the weather begins to drive people in, you know, in undercover, we're going to be forced to go to parklets for anybody who wants to try to do business, because we're not going to close the whole avenue and put a tent over the top of it. So, you know, I also think the stakes here are not, you know, gargantuan. But for the reasons I expressed, Madam Mayor, I'll be voting against the recommendation.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. So I mean, I think big pictures, there's no perfect solution. There's no great solution. I see, before I speak, I see Councilmember Coulson and the Vice Mayor both have their hands up. I'm not sure who is first, so I'll go to the Vice Mayor since she was less recent to speak. Go ahead, Vice Mayor O'Brien.
I just want to add that I don't necessarily disagree with Councilmember Brownrigg and his statements regarding enforcement. So I do think whatever direction we do go forward, that we really do need to toughen up on the oversight, that people are really following the regulations. Because if there isn't, you know, if we just keep warning and warning and warning, that doesn't mean a whole lot unless you actually cite people. That hits them a little bit harder. I think we've done a nice job in regard to giving all the warnings, but I think enough time has passed now that people should know better. And then secondly, in regard to the bike and skateboarding issue, we may want to add signs stating that they should not be skateboarding and biking, because those signs are not up. And I will give the benefit of the doubt of people not knowing. And I look at the signage as warnings, but if those are not followed, I think we have to definitely implement citations in regard to that. I did ask the question, I think it was of the city manager, how does that work with minors? But those tickets, just like a traffic ticket, or would go to the parents' residence. And so they will be responsible for taking care of those tickets.
Thank you, Vice Mayor O'Brien. Councilmember Coulson, go ahead.
Thank you. So mine is more of a logistics question, which is Councilman Brownrigg brings up a really good point, which is that, I mean, we will not be able to acquire all of these barriers tomorrow and set this all up tomorrow. So what do we do for the upcoming weekend and maybe the next weekend or Labor Day weekend while we get this program in place? Do we extend the street closure for just 2 more weeks to allow the staff the time to acquire, find, and get the barriers up, and then just sort of ambush the street, 1 week?
Yes.
Is that what we do?
We would keep the weekend street closure until we have the barriers procured so that we could set up the parklets.
Fantastic.
And giving everyone notice, via the e-news and social media and whatnot. And the restaurateurs already have their encroachment permits signed. So, Public Works may have to look at it and just see if anything needs to be tweaked about it. But I suspect that whatever documentation they have is already good enough.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. So I'll be brief because I think it seems like we're moving in the direction towards parklets. I don't think there's any ideal solution. I think all our information is perfect. But what's compelling to me is at the end of the day, the Business Improvement District asked their businesses, has this helped or has it hurt? And we had kind of a split. 24 said it helped, 29 said it hurts. Now that's not 100% of people voting, but that sort of reflects what I've been getting from hearing from different constituents that own businesses on the avenue, and it's kind of a toss-up. So it's not 100%. I think it's been great for restaurants, but I think some other businesses do have concerns if they're trying to do pick up, drop off, or if they're in retail for a myriad of solutions. I do like the other thing I like about the parklets is that it's a little bit more equitable for everybody. Everybody's kind of in the same boat. It's 7 days a week you get a parklet, as opposed to some people get sort of carte blanche more on a couple days, and other people are more constrained but have more days. So I think there's a little bit more equity for all the different businesses involved. And I do think I agree with Councilmember Coulson and Councilmember Ortiz, and I think the Vice Mayor mentioned it. It seems like it could be a longer term solution that they can kind of invest in and hopefully make a go of it. What I love that we did is that we tried it. I think I'm delighted that so many people have fallen in love with a pedestrian promenade and that European feel that brought to Burlingame Avenue. I wish we were trying it. I think we tried it because it's COVID-19 and our goal was to create better social distancing, a safe place for businesses to operate. But I hope we might revisit this opportunity in the summers when social distancing isn't an issue, where we don't have face coverings someday in the future, and then we can just consider a beautiful pedestrian promenade and try something really unique as a destination and have the courage to maybe go there. If we can just get those darn teens off their bikes mowing people down. I know I've talked to groups of them. I don't think it's the adults that are a problem, but some of the young teens just really were irresponsible on the avenue, and that's a shame with their wheeled vehicles, because it's a nice thing if everybody can live in harmony and use it appropriately. So I think at this point, we've already talked a lot about this. We've got a couple other items to discuss. We should probably go ahead and, for the record, take a vote about the Economic Development Subcommittee's recommendation to migrate to parklets. Madam City Manager, any further comments before we vote on this?
I think we have talked about it enough.
Okay, do we need a vote?
Let's just go for it.
Okay. All right, would someone like to make a motion to accept the Economic Development Subcommittee's recommendation? I see Councilmember Ortiz raising his hand, I think.
Madam Mayor, I move that we accept the recommendation of the Economic Development Subcommittee. They are brilliant.
Second.
All right, and a second by the Vice Mayor. Thank you. We'll take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Coulson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg?
So I agree that the Economic Subcommittee is brilliant, but I'm going to vote against this particular recommendation.
Councilmember Ortiz?
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg, and yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien?
Yes.
Mayor Beach?
Yes. All right, we have put that one to bed. Now we know what we're operating in as we move to, I think the appropriate thing is to move to talk about the personal services, if we can go back in our memories and remember the issues surrounding it. I'm going to take the privilege to ask maybe the first question on this. I was really intrigued by the option that when I read the Economic Development Subcommittee notes about potentially offering parklet space in city parking lots rather than potentially parklet space for personal services right adjacent, say on Burlingame Avenue next door to a restaurant, because it seems like it might be a little bit more compatible to have personal services if we did decide to allow them to be in a nearby parking lot. Madam City Manager, or maybe it's a question for your other staff team, what parking lots were considered, or does staff think that's a feasible opportunity? I don't know how far that idea got teased out in the subcommittee. And would it meet the it sounds like it could meet the guidelines for proximity to?
Guidelines are pretty non-specific. I know I had heard from the county manager that they were considering taking a parking lot and doing this for unincorporated businesses or perhaps other businesses in Redwood City. So I think, you know, it works if we want it to work. We had talked about Lot J, which is the lot behind the Apple store. I don't know, Syed, if you want to jump in with any other options.
So Lisa, in addition to Lot J, which is more convenient and close by to their establishments on the avenue, then Lot O is another one, which is a little bit distant, but not too far from the avenue. Lot O generally has parking available due to this COVID situation.
That's the train station lot.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Colleagues, do you have other questions about the personal services portion of the staff report?
I did want to mention, I'm sorry for interrupting. We do have someone on the line, Jackie Berry, who joined us for the Economic Development Subcommittee, and she is a consultant to salons. So if we have more technical questions, I know she said that she would be willing to help us with some of those.
Thank you for the heads on that, heads up on that, and we'll be sure to make sure she's first in the chute when we consolidate our questions for when it's time for the public to open up. I see Councilmember Coulson had her hand up, I think first. Go ahead.
I think Councilman Brownrigg did first, actually, so I'll defer to him.
Okay, Councilmember Brownrigg, go ahead.
So simple question, and I did read the Economic Subcommittee minutes, thank you, but do we have any kind of survey of how many salons and, you know, do we have anything that actually represents feedback from our salons before we start making these decisions, or is it just the testimony that was received by the Economic Subcommittee?
We didn't do any surveys. This is all fairly recent, that this was even an option. You know, we have anecdotal evidence that some want to do it and some don't and can't figure out how to do it. They, you know, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of what you can do. For example, if you are a hair salon, you can't do anything that involves chemicals, and you can't even wash hair. So, right, you know, really just cutting. And for some people, you know, just cutting may not be feasible.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm Buena from La Vie Nail Bar.
Thank you, Ms. Rinchin. You'll have an opportunity to comment when we open it up to public comment, but at this point in the meeting, this is the opportunity for the council members to ask questions of staff. So if you could stand by, thank you. Councilmember Coulson, go ahead.
So my question was exactly Councilman Brownrigg's, which is, did we do any sort of formal surveying or whatever? Interestingly, I did call around to some of the salons that I routinely use, and I got some really interesting feedback just speaking to the owners. The most interesting of which was, even if you give us a parklet, even if we can reopen, it's going to be hard for us because my estheticians and my manicurists are all at home homeschooling their children. So I don't even have people to come back in to go to work. So that was just a really interesting observation. And I think one of the points I make on this is just how hard these closures are impacting women-owned businesses, women-owned workers, and women-owned women service suppliers, because a lot of salons and manicure and hair cutting are really do employ a lot of moms, and a lot of women. So just I want to express my complete and utter empathy for all those people who are trying to make ends meet and do their job. And I wish the governor would just come back and say, hey, this is not where we're finding contact tracing, and they're doing a good job of keeping themselves safe. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. We certainly heard loud and clear from our county health officer that he completely concurs and is leading the charge with your point of view, that he doesn't think this is where the COVID is spreading, and it's unfortunate, but these are the state rules we have to play by. So Vice Mayor O'Brien, go ahead.
I just wanted to make the comment that this is kind of, new territory that just came up recently in regard to hair salons, nail salons. So there wasn't a survey done, and we just kind of went back from feedback that we were receiving at the Economic Development Subcommittee. I actually don't really know exactly how many nail salons and hair salons are on Burlingame Avenue itself, how many are on the side streets. If we were going to look at a parking lot, does that mean maybe we should look at, if that was the road we were going down and we're using a parking lot, I know what's going to happen is that somebody, many people are going to say, well, parking spaces already be taken away from parklets. So then do we revisit opening the side streets? That's another point that we may have to take into consideration. But I think overall, and I won't speak for Councilmember Ricardo, but as a member of the Economic Development Subcommittee, I think we're just trying to think outside the box and try to provide as many options and opportunities for these businesses to work. It may or may not work for some of these businesses, but at least we wanted to have the discussion. Unfortunately, Governor Newsom has made his decisions. And I know we're not in total agreement on that, but we have to make the best of the situation that we've been provided. And so that's why we are just kind of throwing these ideas out to at least have that discussion and really show the community and the businesses that we're really trying to figure out any potential option that may work for them. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Vice Mayor O'Brien. Colleagues, do we have any other questions before we open up to public comment on this matter? Seeing no questions from colleagues, let's go ahead Madam City Clerk, if Miss Berry would like to speak, I'm not sure if she has some comments or if she's just there as a resource for us, but we could start with her, and then if not, we can go down the line for other members of the public who wish to join in the conversation.
Sure, it looks like she unmuted herself, so she's ready to go.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi, Miss Berry. We can hear you, and if you could take, if you can try to keep it to 2 minutes, that would be great. If you have some comments, but if colleagues have questions for you, I'll allow that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to say thank you again. I was on the meeting with the committee last week, and we kind of brought this all up. And between all the regulations from government to the county health to state board and then down to cities, it's really overwhelming for these businesses to know what they can and cannot do. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of this is down to the news and the media. It just came out, you guys can work outdoors. Nothing was mentioned as to all the regulations, all the criteria that they had to check with their city, and people were just opening up to be told that, no, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. So from my standpoint as a sales consultant, my job is to try and help my businesses, my salons as best I can. And I'm just trying to guide them. And a lot of them are feeling that they are being pushed aside. It doesn't matter what opportunity, something else just come and hits them. I was actually out Saturday I went to 4 of my salons that were open, and they were working in sweltering heat. And the resilience of them just wanting to make money and put, money on the table and to go out and invest more money into doing outdoor business. These were ones that are doing it in their private areas, because I've already had this conversation with most of the salons I represent, that that's the only place they can do it. And I've given them all the regulations and criterias. There are a few that would look at the option of a parklet. That would mostly, being honest, would be barbers and the nail salons, because reality is, yes, for a lot of these salon owners, it's not worth it for them to take that time and investment to only be allowed to do haircuts. So there are very few that it would work for, whether it be a back parking space where maybe it's in a parking lot that there's a back entrance to that salon, that would work. Or if there is a salon that has a front entrance that is not within that distance of a restaurant, which is very difficult in Burlingame, but at least you guys are making considerations and we appreciate that. The one thing I will say regarding some things that I did hear that were brought up that are in the guidelines.
Thanks. And
that,
if you could, you summarize it quick and then we'll move on. But yes,
okay.
Go ahead, finish your thought.
That was to do with water, electricity, and disposing. That is all in the guidelines that they should be following anyway. They have to be in a certain radius of accessibility to be able to dispose of all water and everything within the salon, and everything outside has to be enclosed containers where they can put the hair, all the disposal nail things, and that kind of thing.
Yep.
For them to move into a public parking lot, I can say right off the bat would not work for hair salons. I've seen my salon has to get an industrial dolly to put her styling chairs back into the salon, and she's working in a private outdoor area.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you for that. I'm going to just, as we did for Ms. Kelleher, if there's colleagues that have a direct question for Ms. Berry, we can ask them now. And if not, we'll go on and we'll allow other members of the public to have comments. All right, I don't see any hands raised. Ms. Berry, thank you for being a part of the economic. Oh, I see Councilmember Colson, go ahead.
Yes, so I didn't have the chance, obviously, to meet Ms. Berry, but thank you for all your work you're doing with these businesses here in town. You're offering them a lifeline, and you're obviously super versed in this and you care a lot. So just as someone who didn't get to meet you during the committee, I'm impressed even in just the 2 minutes, and I want to thank you for all the help.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for, yes, being a part of our committee and helping us kind of consider all the big picture issues that go into this. Seeing no other questions from colleagues for Ms. Berry, I'm going to open it up right now to public comment. Because of our time limits, we're going to have to keep public comment to 2 minutes each. And Madam City Clerk, you can go ahead and manage that from here forward. Thanks.
Sure, I don't have anything written in, so I think we should start with Ms. Renchen.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, I'm representing La Vie Nail Bar at 1217 Burlingame Avenue. I know we've been in the spotlight in the last 1 week, just like the person prior to me spoke. I didn't have any kind of warning, any kind of guidelines in regards to what we can and can't do after the governor saying, we can operate outside. After the first quarantine hit, I had to let go all my girls who do nails because it's impossible to live here without any pay in this kind of cost of living. And I had to rehire 8 girls after I was given 1 week of notice to open up on June 19th. And I housed 4 of them free of charge. I pay their rent, and I'm a single mom of 3. I don't know what to do. And I feel like I've been in this meeting all night. I've been hearing everything about closure of the Burlingame Avenue with the street closing and providing parking spaces to restaurants. And I feel extremely singled out because I am paying the same amount of rent as everyone else. And I don't know where everybody's situation is, but if my only option is to operate in a designated parking lot behind Apple store or wherever. That is nearly telling me that no, you cannot operate, because I've spent thousands of dollars installing plexiglass in between all my manicure and pedicure chairs, in front of all the manicure stations, purchasing, sanitizing equipment. Restaurants, I'm not speaking against them, but I'm just comparing. Restaurants do not take temperatures. They do not hand sanitize their clients. They do not, I require my clients to hand sanitize and soap wash their hands. They're not allowed to touch any of the products we choose.
Excuse me, Ms. Rinchin, I'm going to extend public comment so you can have a full minute more to 3 minutes, but I'm going to have you stop in 1 minute, okay? So I can be fair to everybody, but go
Yes.
ahead for one more minute and I'll give everybody 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So currently I'm out on Burlingame Avenue because I have no other choice. And if I'm given the only choice to operate out in the parking lot, that's not an option. And I am operating as of now. I can submit photos of my current operation outdoors via email or whatever, but I am setting up my pedicure chairs where restaurants put their tables, and I am requesting you what is the term you use for closing out the parking lots to get businesses? What's the parklets? I'm requesting parklets to safely operate, because closing down for me is not an option. My landlord did not give me a dime discount. I can show you my new contract that he gave me. I'm behind 4 months rent.
Thank you, Ms. Rinchin. I'm so glad you were a part of this meeting tonight. Your comments are very important, and it's important for us to hear your perspective. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to go on to the next public comment, and we'll give 3 minutes to everybody. And out of respect for everybody, I will cut whoever is off at 3 minutes for the next public comment, so everybody has equal time.
We don't have any more public comment.
Okay, we'll give an opportunity for anybody calling in to dial *9 on their telephone. And I don't see anybody there. Thank you. We'll
Hello,
give,
did you get?
Mr. Silverman, would you
Yes.
like to make a public comment? We'll go ahead and give you 3 minutes. Thank you. You can begin.
Thank you. I want to thank Jackie for being on the line. Jackie Berry. She's one of my reps that comes and services us and does an incredible job. So I really appreciate her input. As she quite rightly said, we're on Burlingame Avenue, and I've got 16 hairstylists, I've got a facialist, I've got a threading studio, and I've got 2 manicurists. And it's impossible for us to work outside. As Jackie quite rightly said, there's no way we can work in, the car park in the back. And we certainly can't have 16 hairstylists working in the front on the avenue. It just would not, first of all, it wouldn't be allowed, from the health department or the state board. So unfortunately, I hear that I did come on this call a little late, but I heard that the parklets have been enforced now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, which, I see the pluses and minuses on that, but I mean, I know we're going to lose 50% of our parking. And so taking away from additional parking, if we were to use the car parks for personal services, is going to make it, I think, even harder. So that's all I have to say at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Silverman. We appreciate your input. Let's give members of the public another chance in case they've decided they would like to participate. We'll give another minute if anybody wants to raise their hand. Or if you can't figure out the hand raise, just go ahead and unmute yourself. Okay, seeing none. I see no hands raised through the telephone feature as well. Madam City Clerk, one last chance. Is there anybody on the chat or that wrote into public comment?
No.
Okay, let's close public comment, and then we'll have an opportunity to deliberate or ask additional questions. I have to say, some of the feedback from the public comment I've heard is pretty consistent from other personal care services, particularly in the women's salons. I think have a lot of reservations of even making it worth their while to be out there in a parklet, but perhaps there's other personal care services that might function. So then as we're trying to provide options, what might those be? Colleagues, does anybody want to kick off with any other questions or recommendations? Councilmember Coulson, go ahead. I see your hand raised, I think.
So I have a question for City Manager Goldman. And what it is taking aside the fact that the salon that is operating, I think it's Rinchin's salon that is operating, and my heart goes out to her, feeling I really, as a small business owner myself, I'm just so sorry for all this of what's going on. So I want to try to do something that will help these people. If have like the restaurateurs to the side or anyone in the street, have people on the avenue filed complaints about their salon being on the sidewalk. And I'm just trying to get an assessment of, the public's perception.
I don't have an answer to that. I can tell you that there is an extension cord stretched across the sidewalk, which is a tripping hazard.
So
I don't know that they have ADA, if they have an ADA aisle between their, they have chairs, stations up against the building and then out, towards the curb. And they have tents up, which don't provide sufficient clearance. So they've really created a whole outdoor studio. I empathize. I hate what's happening to these salons. On the other hand, the city has a duty to keep our sidewalks clear and safe, and that is not what's happening right now.
If I might weigh in, we have received complaints about that.
Okay, so we have received complaints about the professional services being conducted out on the street.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, and the complaints centered on, not just sort of the fact that there were activities, but the extent of them and where they were physically. So staff's approach to it has been to try to guide that business and any other to make sure that there is no encroachment on the path of travel for ADA purposes, and making sure that there's safe sidewalk access, and also that they shouldn't be having a tent that extends over the entirety of the sidewalk where people need to walk and it's not part of their business area. We were unable to get compliance on those things as of last week. I don't know.
So if we were to offer the salon folks on Howard, technically, I don't know what would happen with Burlingame Avenue. Broadway, because there are a lot of them there. But just let's say Howard and Burlingame Avenue, if we were to offer them the opportunity to also have a parklet, being non-discriminatory about businesses, and they were to comply with the ADA and comply with spacing and social distancing, they ran their plug not from their store, but into the city street, which is what the parklet people are doing. They're running them into the tree outlets, is what I can see, for people that are hooking lights up or twinkly lights or whatever to decorate their parklets. So if they had all their ADA and all their violations and everything done and could fix it, and we could set up a parklet for them, the issue would just simply be, we need to make sure that everything is all water and everything is collected and brought back into the store, just like a regular salon.
Right. So as was discussed before, there are a number of state-based requirements that come from the state licensing agency. So anybody who's engaged in those endeavors have to comply with their own licensing requirements. And those are things that the city doesn't create. I think the city would also need to review, like we do any encroachment permit, to make sure that in the particular situation we're talking about, that it's safe for other members of the public and so on. But all the restaurants and who are on the sidewalk or extending into parklets have gone through our abbreviated encroachment permit process, in which staff has a chance to look at their plans. Where are you planning to put the tables? How much access is there? Do we need to scooch things over one way or another in order to make sure that people can safely travel? We would expect the same thing for personal services. The issue is that the council has to say whether personal services are allowed outdoors or not. That's the policy decision that you all have to articulate. The implementation of how to safely do that, I would think would follow along similar lines to the restaurants. I think we might also want, because of the nature of the services, it may be worth having a conversation with particular businesses to see if they do have rear access onto somewhere, would that be a better place where they would have fewer restrictions and might be able to have more chairs, or, there may be different places, or as the city manager said, there may be a nearby public parking lot that we might be able to give up a couple spaces, and that might work better. Right now, it's a very site-by-site based question. And because of all of the regulations from the state, it's going to be hard for a lot of these businesses to do it at all. But I think from the staff perspective, we just want council's direction on, are these conversations we can entertain, right? Are we allowed to allow these uses? And then if so, what are the parameters under which we're allowed to work with these businesses to make sure they happen?
Okay, thank you.
I think whatever else happens, we absolutely have to maintain the life safety issues that the city manager was talking about.
100%. And I'm not questioning that. What I'm just questioning is, like, how would the process work? And is there a way, and just making sure that there would be something that's feasible. My guess is that most of the hair salons would not prevail themselves of this type of an opportunity for the various reasons we discussed. Manicure, pedicure on the avenue side streets might be more amenable to it if we could work out a solution for them. So that's just my question. And I really appreciate the city manager and the city attorney's perspective on that and how we would maybe go about that.
If I could just weigh in. So I looked back at the staff report where we talk about at the bottom of page 4, what the State Department of Consumer Affairs guidance includes. And these outdoor services must be closed to public access during period of service. So, if the council was interested in this, the setup that's Ms. Rinchin has right now violates that state law, because there are people walking through the stations that are set up next to the building, and then the stations that are over in, like where the parking meters are. And so all of it really would have to be parking meters and then into the parking strip itself, and not up against the building.
But those are the kinds of discussions that staff already has with restaurants when they apply for an encroachment permit, is to make sure that we look at those kinds of issues. And so we have an existing, expedited method for doing that. It's just a question of whether these kinds of services can also have those options.
If I like to weigh in about some of the factors that council should consider in your deliberation, because these are not apples to apples in all respects compared to restaurants. There are specific issues, specific guidelines that they have to abide by to the state and the county, and so which makes them more complicated than typical restaurants. So for the purpose of city policy perspective, we have to look into whether there is available sidewalk width. What is the width of the sidewalk, and whether that would obstruct the flow of pedestrian and would impact to distancing wise, whether they can maintain social distancing, how many seating that they would have, where the people would be waiting for, where, how far they would have to be marked somewhere in that area for them to be maintaining social distancing. And also the other factor is proximity to restaurant, which was discussed earlier, and food businesses. And timing of operation is another factor that City of San Mateo considered to minimize impacts to food businesses. And also if, for example, the business that we were talking about is that if they were to not use sidewalk, but rather the parklet in the front, that would basically taking away 2 parking spaces, parallel parking spaces, they could do that as long as they would not obstruct the flow of pedestrians or have cables, wires in the street. Again, the use of chemicals, collection of all that would be part of the discussions.
Thank you, Director Matuza. So I guess what I'm hearing certainly from Councilmember Coulson, and it sounds like at least the Vice Mayor indicated, you know, what can we do to lean in? Now, maybe not everybody wants to take advantage of this, but what is reasonable that we could feel comfortable allowing, and what are those parameters? We could take an approach certainly I don't think we need to litigate whether or not the personal care services is in code violation. They got to be compliant with, you know, ADA and everything. That's a separate issue. But, you know, generally speaking, San Mateo has a pretty restrictive policy. If I'm reading if I recall what City Manager Goldman summarized and what is in their regulation, it's basically allowed, personal services are allowed on private property. They have to be sort of nearby the location, but it looks like they can't locate furniture or perform services in the public sidewalk or public right of way. And then there's some restrictions about being within 50 feet of a restaurant. So I think we need to consider whether or not we're comfortable even considering anything in the public right of way, number one. And then number two, if we are, do we have concerns, since we have already said restaurants can operate in parklets because they can't operate indoors. Retail can, they're struggling too, but restaurants can't operate indoors. They're going to be in parklets. Do we have concerns about personal services, whether it's nail places or hair places, or should we treat them differently? Could be close by to restaurants. And I'd like to hear colleagues' thoughts on some of those issues.
I'll go. So I still have a lot of questions about this. And the one thing that I keep coming back to, that we had the conversation at the Economic Development Subcommittee, was the requirement to have 3 sides open if there was some sort of enclosure. So if that is the case, I'm picturing the parklet. So 3 sides of that parklet would need to be open. And then I feel awful for what everybody's going through. Ms. Rinchin and Mr. Silverman are, again, I can't say enough. And I have a lot of customers who are going through a lot of really hard times. So I don't have all the answers. But I do have a few things that I'm pretty clear on. I don't think we should allow people to set up on the sidewalks. The parklets, I think we can look into, but we need to address the part about the covering. We need to address what we allow in the parklets, or as far as chemicals, as far as how we require them to take care of what I consider biological waste, which is nail clippings and hair clippings. And so there's still a lot of questions with that. I'm clear that we would not want them in the parking lot. We would never want them close to any eating establishments. And I know that there's some, in the San Mateo policy, there's some question about the timing, but the thought of it being close to a restaurant makes me a little sick. It's not the same as a restaurant because of the chemicals, because of the hair trimmings, because of the nail clippings. It's not the same thing. So we can't make that false equivalency, because we need to treat this like what it is. And there are a lot of regulations that govern this already, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we just need to be aware of them when we make this decision. And again, so I still have a lot of questions. I'm just clear on a few no ways.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. I think you bring up a good reminder that under state law, if there's any kind of privacy tenting, it has to be open on 3 sides for personal services. That's correct, City Manager Goldman? So we have to think about that. Do other colleagues share Councilmember Ortiz's concern about having these kind of personal services located near restaurants? I don't know who was first, whether it was, but I'll go ahead and have Vice Mayor O'Brien speak first, and then we'll go to Councilmember Brownrigg next.
I do have some concerns located near a restaurant. And maybe my question is to Jackie, because I don't know the state guidelines inside and out. Is there a minimum requirement in regard to distance to restaurants? Is it the 50 feet? Is it possible, Mayor Beach, you can ask her that?
Sure. I think the 50 feet was San Mateo's designation, but well, actually.
It makes me wonder how they came up with that number.
Yeah, City Manager Lisa Goldman, do you want to try to answer that first? And if not, we'll open it up to Ms. Berry.
The 50 feet is from San Mateo. I don't believe that's in the state guidelines, but Ms. Berry really understands this much better than the rest of us. So
Yeah.
if she's still with us, if she could unmute herself and respond to that, I think it would be great.
Sure, thank you.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, Ms. Berry, did you hear the question? I'm happy to repeat it if you need.
I did, yes. That is San Mateo's guidelines, and there's nothing in anything that I have read other than it has to be approved by the city. So it's an individual cities, and I totally get the fact that nobody wants to get their hair cut or their nails done while people are eating, or vice versa. So we are looking for options for those that we know that a very small percentage of salons and businesses are going to be able to take advantage of this. We just want to give those that maybe could have the possibility to do it, if we can help a few as opposed to none. And so I totally get that there has to be some distancing with restaurants, but they're like the girl from the nail salon said, and I'd love to speak with her at some point and help her. They're all paying rent too. They're all paying back rent. They're all, and I know this is not the city's fault. This is all guidelines from the state, but if we can help a few, it would help somebody.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. I mean, that's why I do think the parklet option, but maybe the parklet on a city parking lot is an intriguing option to explore. And given the fact that there seem to be, it's not going to be an overwhelming number of people. It might not be a ton of parking spaces, but it gives that option and it gets away from restaurants. I think that's an intriguing option to consider. Councilmember Brownray, go ahead.
I still wasn't finished with
Oh,
my.
I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Bryan, go ahead. My bad.
So Jackie, thank you for answering that question. And that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from, is if there is a way to allow some of these businesses to function, even though it's extremely limited, I'd at least want to offer that option. And whether they take it or not is up to them, as long as all the criteria has been met. So in regard to the restaurants, I am not keen on a salon, or whether it's hair or nail, being adjacent or in very close proximity to a restaurant. I just, in regards to health, I don't think it's the best setup. I don't see how the opening of tents, the three sides or structure, would even work on a sidewalk. It would have to be a parklet because of the public walking back and forth. So I think we can kind of get rid of the sidewalk issue and look at the parklet versus a parking lot. And so I would be open to the parklet as long as ADA, all safety criteria, and not within a certain distance of a restaurant. And I'm not sure what that distance would be, or adhere to. You know, are we limited to just the one option, or can we do both? Can we say, you know, if a parklet works, great, go that route. But if a few parking spaces we can set aside for maybe salons that would really want to do it, can we make that work? I do think that is a viable option. I'm not sure how reasonable it is, let's say for the hair salons, like, I don't know if it was Jackie that mentioned it or someone else. They have heavy equipment, so they're not going to be able to do it unless it's like right at their back door. But maybe that's a possibility. And then the last question I have is, what do we define chemical as? Because I mean, you have acetone and you know, the nail polish and nail polish remover and all that. Is that considered a chemical? Or would like Petty's and Manny's work, but like acrylics and gels and all that doesn't work? So I don't know how that's defined.
Thank you, Vice Mayor O'Brien. Director Murtuza or City Manager Goldman, do you have any comments that can address the Vice Mayor's question about how it's defined, or is it pretty much defined by state law, how they define which chemicals are allowed and which are not?
In the state Board of Barbering and Cosmetology memorandum, it talks about permissible outdoor services, and it says all chemical hair services, including but not limited to permanent waving, relaxing, bleaching, tinting, coloring, dyeing, and straightening are not allowed. So it's not addressing nail salons that I can see. That's more.
Yeah, and that's why I asked the question, because I know the hair was defined, but I don't remember nail.
Yeah, I don't see anything. Now, Jackie, who knows, again, more than I do, might, I mean, I think Jackie works more with hair salons, but she may know about nail salons, but I don't see anything in this memorandum that's specific to nail salons. In the ED subcommittee, we just talked about how there's, you know, a smell to nail polish, and even more so to nail polish remover, and that nail polish remover is a fairly strong scent, a chemically scent. But I don't see anything specific in here saying that you can or can't use, you know, nail related chemicals.
Ms. Berry, do you have any comments on that about nail related regulations from the state?
As far as I'm aware, that there's nothing in there regarding nail polish remover. It's primarily more to chemicals in the hair service.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a interesting
I'd
point.
like
Yes,
to-
go ahead, Director Matuza.
I'd just like to point out that regarding the stormwater regulations for the anything to be prevented from the water pollution perspective, so they have to be whatever they're using in terms of that may cause water pollution, that they have to specially handle that, even though it may be not called out for in these regulations, but if they're used in the public right away, they have to be properly handled and prevented from getting into the storm drain system.
Thank you, Director Matuza. And that's something that we would probably call out very specifically what our storm drain regulations would be, and if we allowed this. Vice Mayor O'Brien, did you have an additional question? Or no? Did you have an additional question?
All right, no other questions. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thank you. I think Councilmember Brownrigg had his hand up next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So unlike the last chunk, I'm going to just join the consensus here because I think this is a hard call, but I would also suggest that from a process point of view, Madam Mayor, I personally would be content allowing the Economic Subcommittee working with staff to make a determination if they were to get more information. In other words, I'm a little skeptical that we can come up with the best answer tonight, given that this is so new and rather complicated for all of us. Having said that, I will suggest, personally, just speaking personally, I don't think it's fair to say you're next to a restaurant, you can't do it, you're not, and you can. So I'm not really excited about that, but I do share Councilman Ortiz and Vice Mayor O'Brien's concerns about salons being next to restaurants and performing services. And quite honestly, my guess is most of the clients would not be super excited to be having their pedicure right next to a restaurant either. So I think for me, if we were going to do something, what might make more sense is to take an obscure parking lot, because let's remember that this business model is most of these hair cutters or nail doers are independent contractors to the renter, and in a way is not tied to a geography the way a restaurant is. And so why not take a more remote parking lot? And what occurs to me is the parking lot next to the library and maybe the upper tier. And if there is sufficient demand, and so that's a question, if there is sufficient demand, then potentially put a tarpaulin over the top and let people rent space up there from the city on a cost basis and provide services which are more discreet, which would be open on four sides, and which would, be the city leaning into an industry and trying to help them. So that strikes me as a way that you answer some of these other objections. But having said that, I will join the consensus. I do want to try to help small business. I think that the sidewalk solution is not a great one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. Go ahead, Councilmember Coulson.
Thank you. So I as Miss Rinchin's business has shown us, because I've been by it numerous times, my office is right across the street and it's packed. I don't think her clients are concerned at all about getting a manicure or pedicure in maybe a parklet. I see the demand there regardless. So I too think that we probably won't solve it all tonight. So kicking it back to the Economic Development Subcommittee it would be a good idea. I think there is a timing issue here. I think these people are trying to pay their rent. They're, unlike hair salons, which have independent contractors, these are employees in the nail salons, and they have to either fire them or hire them. And so going back and firing and hiring people, I think, is really hard. I don't know that there's a lot of nail salons that will even want to do this, but clearly we do have one for sure that wants to. And so my thought is, I'm not as worried about this being next to, I guess because I'm watching it every single day in my office, I'm not worried about it. And if you can only cover one side, if the restaurant covers the side near the personal services and the other restaurant covers it near the personal services, so they have a 3-sider, and I don't know how that works, but if you're in between and somebody creates, you have a parklet and someone's here and here, and they just drop, a vanity cloth down the middle, and then they're open on the front and the back. And even if we can't really open back up, but possibly the Economic Development Committee could talk to Ms. Rinchin, and maybe they'd be willing to do, like buffs, no acrylic, or, just like hair salon people, you have to come with your nail polish off. We can't use acetone. My concern about setting them all the way up at like a parking lot is they have to carry all of the water that they're using to soak somebody's feet in, or they would have to carry all that from the parking lot all the way back to their store half a mile away, loading it up in cars and dragging it back and forth. It's simply not practical. And I think really and truly, if you can't get them right in front of their salon or out the back door, it's probably impractical and infeasible. So my interest would be to try to figure out how to, there's a lot on Howard. They're not near restaurants. Those might work. The one on the Avenue, which is, I think we only have one manicurist on the Ave, which is between 2 restaurants. Figure out if there's a way to either let them go out the back into our parking lot or in the front in a parklet, and try to do it expeditiously so we can get them working in the next, week or 2.
So thank you for those comments. I'm gonna check in with the city manager at this point. It sounds to me that if we, my concern is kicking it back to the Economic Development Subcommittee doesn't give you enough guidance to deal with what's now. And so, yeah. And so there's really 2 options then. It sounds like we're all leaning, it sounds like the majority is leaning into doing something, to allowing something. I think the question before us, we agree that no sidewalks. They've got to follow, everybody's got to follow ADA and state regulations. Are we open to, if it sounds like if it were workable for any of these salons to go into a back public parking lot, I think that's easily accessible if that were something they'd be open to. It sounds like a majority of the council would be willing to give them space in a public parking lot. The question I think we need to answer tonight is, do we have a majority of the council that's comfortable with a salon operating in a parklet in front that could be near or adjacent to restaurants? And then could a personal services be allowed to operate in front of a parklet if there's no restaurant nearby, say on Howard or other streets? So those are the 2 questions. I think it sounds to me like the real questions still left on the table are front parklets on streets adjacent to restaurants. If so, how close? And front parklets where there are no restaurants nearby. Have I distilled that down to what we need to? Councilmember Ortiz, I see your hand just popped up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I would stick to I don't feel that it's right to have it right next to a restaurant. So I would go along with the San Mateo ordinance where they call for 50 feet, I believe. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so that's what I would go for. And I'm sorry, what was the other question?
Whether or not we're open to personal services working in front parklets as long as they're not right near a restaurant. So if it's beyond 50 feet, okay, that would be okay with you.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it would be okay with you for them to operate if it were a viable option to be in a back public parking lot.
Correct. Yes.
If that were convenient for them too and workable, then they have a little bit more privacy for their services, their One Shield services. Okay.
There's behind the south side of Burlingame Avenue, there is an alley between Lorton and Park, and then between Park and Primrose. There's, I know the one between Park and Lorton is actually a private alley, and that has been offered up as an option. That was not, we were not taken up on that offer, but that is available. Of course, the business would need to get permission from the landlord because that is a private alley.
Okay.
I'm not sure if the one, Syed may know, if the one between Primrose and Park, that's probably also a private alley, right?
There is both, the one between Primrose and Park has a City Hall lane extension, which allows one-way traffic out onto Park Road. So we may have to close that off. I have to look at, there's a fire lane, 20-foot fire lane for that for that stretch of the segment of the building.
At least the other side between Park and Lorton, that's closed on one end, so you can't drive through.
Right, no, I'm talking about the Primrose. And
Right. But the other side would be available.
Yes.
Right.
So in the interest of bringing this to some kind of resolution, there sounds like there's a proposal to kind of align with San Mateo, which there is some elegance to for consistency. At least that's what Councilmember Ortiz is suggesting, that maybe keeping that 50-foot distance, but allowing it in the public right of way if it's beyond 50 feet distance, but also going a step beyond San Mateo and saying if there's public parking lots that are workable, that we would be open to that. And it doesn't preclude what Councilmember Brownrigg said, that if at a later date we could come up with some creative space that kind of goes above and beyond and sets up a space, we could consider that in the future. But those are some ideas that are kicking around. So I think Vice Mayor O'Brien had her hand up next, and then we'll go to Councilmember Coulson.
Yes, so I would actually agree with Councilmember Ortiz and what he's brought up. My biggest concern is the restaurant distance. So if it was for consistency reasons with San Mateo, I think the 50 feet would be reasonable. If there isn't a restaurant, I don't have any problem using a parklet for what they need to use, as long as they adhere by, ADA, the opening of the structure, water disposal, all the criteria. If they're open to a parking lot the city parking lot that we can give them 1 or 2 spaces, whatever spaces they need in order to have their business function, that would be fine. And then I would also include what our city manager just brought up, that if there is an alley, private alley that they can get permission to utilize, I would be open to using that space too. I do think in regard to the option that Councilmember Brownrigg brought up, I really don't think it's doable for the reasons that Councilmember Coulson mentioned, but that can always be revisited at a later date. I would like to see how this works. And it may work for the few businesses that want to have an option. And if it doesn't, and these businesses feel that a farther parking lot would work, it's worth the discussion.
Thank you, Vice Mayor O'Brien. I kind of tend to lean into what you said as well. Councilmember Coulson, go ahead.
So I can agree with most of that, but I have one big issue, which is, why does a restaurant get priority over a nail salon? I mean, and I think that's my like philosophical big issue, which is, so let's just say that there's a salon and they're not within 50 feet of a restaurant, and that we've given them a parklet and they open up, and then their next door neighbor gets leased to a restaurant. Does the restaurant have to stay closed while the parklet if the nail salon is there first, they get it, and then within 50 feet, you can't have a restaurant on either side? Or do they have to close down if someone leases to a restaurant? It's just, I have a real issue with picking one industry to survive over another. And so that, I'm not as concerned about the 50 feet. I'd like to try to, I think we should prioritize if we can get them into the back parking lot, if we can get them onto some private space, if all those things are great. But if, you know, let's say you get a parklet on Howard and you're not within 50 feet, then within 50 feet of either side, if that's going to be the case, then you can't have a restaurant within 50 feet. So the landlords cannot, you know, they can lease to a restaurant, but you couldn't open a restaurant if they already are there first. It just feels to me like that's fair. I just want it to be fair to everyone. And I find that these, again, I go back to a lot of these businesses are owned by minorities and by women. And I feel like they are getting the shaft on this, and I'm not happy about it at all. And I'd like to figure out a way to try to get them, you know, something that can work. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. I think the city attorney has her hand up, and when she has her hand up, I always try to let her speak next. So go ahead.
I feel badly because I don't actually want to claim priority. I was just going to suggest that, to Councilmember Coulson's point, one way through this might be to look at what is the externality you're trying to address with the 50-foot setback. Because 50 feet is a number that could as easily be 45 or 55 or something. So what is the issue, the underlying issue that you're trying to regulate for? And then how does one address that? If it is strictly a matter of the need for a certain amount of airspace or visual space or something like that, that probably is a distance requirement. If it's a question of making sure there's no detritus that goes from one use into another, there may be other ways of addressing that that aren't necessarily based on a 50-foot distance. They may be a more elaborate trash capture setup, you know, or somebody has to have positive pressure on a particular machine or something, you know, like a vacuum attached to a grinder or something like that, so that you don't have, you know, things floating around. So that could be part of a permit process on the city end to say, okay, if you're going to locate anywhere in the public right of way, or if you're going to locate within X number of feet, you have to have a specific plan to deal with certain things. So that would be one way of looking at it. Or if the problem is actually that you believe that you need a certain physical distance, then it would be helpful to sort of identify what that distance is and why it's, you know, that particular setback. Because then that would answer some of the, from the staff implementation perspective, you know, as we're looking at what's feasible and what would work and what can we enforce, which is always my concern, you know, it'd be helpful to have a basis.
Thank you. Madam City Attorney, do you have any concerns about the suggestion that Councilmember Coulson brought up, allowing priority to be whoever sort of got there first? So if a salon is opened on Howard and then a restaurant moves in and wants a parklet next door, that salon keeps priority and restaurant can't open parklet within 50 feet. Do you have any concern about that?
I don't have so the council has a lot of policy range on this, and it's been explicitly given that range by the state. These services are not allowed unless you say they are, and you can impose conditions on it. However, any action that the council takes has to be fair and equitable, and it has to have a reasonable basis articulated in the record, right? So, you know, whatever your decision is, it's simply a matter of making sure that there's a record that supports the basis for that decision. And one option might be to articulate what the concerns are and have staff in the Economic Development Subcommittee flesh those out a little bit better. You know, what are the aims of the council? And then how do we meet those aims? Because clearly we don't have enough information tonight to answer all of those constraints. The state level regulations will take care of a fair amount of this, particularly when it comes to the hair side. It sounds like there may be less guidance on the nail side, and that's somewhere where the city would have to really fill in those details so that we don't find ourselves with, you know, detritus or stormwater issues or those other things, which would definitely be objectively unpleasant or dangerous.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor O'Brien, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to address a couple statements Councilmember Coulson brought up. I just want to clarify, I'm not picking one business over another. The reason I said some type of separation and footage is because I'm looking at it from a health perspective. And that is someone who's getting their nails done. There's clippings that can go a little haywire. There could be bleeding. There is the strong smells. So to me, that's health issues. And that's why I'm doing, I would like to see some type of distance between a nail salon and a restaurant. Now, if there are ways of taking care of that within a smaller distance, then great. But I do strongly feel this is a health issue. It is not a picking of a business over another. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you, Vice Mayor O'Brien. And I don't see colleagues, other colleagues with their hand up right now. I struggle with this too. I wouldn't have a problem with who's established first, then, on a future street, whether it's Howard, if there's a salon that's out there and a restaurant moves in next door, letting that salon continue to operate in a parklet, to Councilmember Colson's point. I do think the reason there's so many more regulations with personal services operating outdoors, the state allowed them outdoors, but there's a lot of regulations because it's intrinsically a different activity. I mean, eating in a restaurant outdoors is a thing we do in our culture, and the personal services tends to be something that's done a little more privately, and because of all the other health regulations with, the chemicals and the smells. So they are a little different. I'd love to lean into both. So I do personally like the idea that I think Councilmember Ortiz proposed, Vice Mayor O'Brien seconded, kind of going with San Mateo, 50 feet from eating establishments, but leaning in even further than San Mateo to try to help and say public parking lots, if that can work adjacent, we're open to that. Parklet space in front if you're not within 50 feet, and open to other ideas too. But I think that's where I lean in on solution, and I'm kind of hearing at least 3 of us leaning towards that direction right now. But I would also add, to address Councilmember Colson's point of view, I'd be okay with, for future, it wouldn't necessarily be that a restaurant gets preference if a salon is already established there. I'd be fine with that as well. I think that's fair and square. I see the Vice Mayor nodding. I don't know. So go ahead, Councilmember Colson.
Yeah, thank you. So that was really my issue. Wasn't some, I totally understand the sort of medical concerns and the issues with it being a different beast. And this is why my reason why I actually think the state has made a huge problem out of something that these salons have been operating safely. They've been doing a good job, and the state has created a much bigger problem. I'm totally in line with Dr. Morrow on this by doing this and forcing, all these other problems that probably are less safe, if you will, for a myriad of other reasons. But my issue is really more just the notion of, was the equity issue. If somebody gets a solution solved and it's working, and then somebody else comes along and says, yeah, well, I have a restaurant and I want to be here, and then we bump them out, that doesn't seem fair. If they've invested in their equipment and their parklet and they've done it fairly, then at that point they get to have the priority. So I'm glad you guys agree with me on that. And that's my real sort of issue with the whole thing. And I guess I'm thinking that another option, and I don't want it to continue too long, but if people weren't using, just like the haircut, if you're not using chemicals, if you're doing soak in water, you're moving your water back into your thing, you're keeping it all contained, then I hope we can figure out a way to work this out for them.
Thank you, Councilmember Colson. I appreciate you bringing the equity issue up. It's a great point, and totally, I think most of us agree with you and Dr. Morrow that this is a big mess that's created that doesn't really have to be a big mess, unfortunately, or it doesn't seem that way. Any other colleagues with final comments before we kind of provide some direction on this? Does anybody want to propose a motion? Councilmember Ortiz, it was your original idea. You want to throw it out there?
I'm just thinking, I was trying to struggle here because what we're saying is that we want to adopt the similar, the same as San Mateo with the few exceptions, saying that we are willing to allow public parking lots and even private parking lots when available as an extension to that, but otherwise it would be the same. So I don't know if that takes care of it. Madam City Attorney, you satisfied with that?
I think also, if I understood correctly, the direction was to consider it in parklets, but only if there was a setback from existing adjacent restaurant uses. So that would be
Correct.
different from San Mateo as well, because San Mateo said no public right of way.
Right.
Great. So I would say no sidewalks, but okay, and the public right of way as long as it's outside the sidewalk on the street.
And outside of the 50-foot setback from
Restaurants,
existing restaurant uses.
existing restaurant uses. Yeah. Thank you for the distinction.
Yes.
Try
So
that.
Because there would be the caveat of if a restaurant moved in after, the salon would have the preference because they were already approved.
I somehow don't see a lot of restaurants opening up anytime soon. But that's,
But there could always be a change of tenancy. So I just want to make sure that's incorporated in the conditions.
So let's have the city attorney, could you articulate it one more time to make sure we're all hearing what we think? I think we're close to there. Madam City Attorney, could you help us?
Sure. I believe the motion is to allow personal services in the public right of way on parklets, but not on sidewalks. In city parking lots, subject to review by the Public Works Department, of course, and private outdoor spaces, provided that they can comply with all of the state regulations governing those services. Any additional reasonable regulations from the city regarding health and safety issues, and that they are 50 feet or more from any existing restaurant use.
I think that was outstanding as far as my understanding. So is
Isn't
that
that
what you
just
meant to
what I
say,
said?
Councilmember Ortiz?
isn't that just what I said?
That's just what
Just
you
about.
said. Do colleagues, do we have any discussion?
So moved.
Do we have any discussion on that motion or clarifications we need to get before we continue?
one-
Councilmember Coulson, go ahead.
One clarification. So let's say that there's a restaurant next door. They are choosing not to serve food, so they're closed for whatever reason, but they exist. And next to, adjacent to that, I'm thinking, you know, possibly whatever the issue is that they're not serving, they've decided not to serve. The salon says, we're interested, we want a parklet. There is nothing open and operating within 50 feet, but they exist, they're just not operating. They put their parklet in. They would have priority. And then if the restaurant came along 6 months later and said, well, now I want to open up and have a parklet, because they weren't interested in it before, and the other people invested in it, they're going to get, it's kind of a first come, first served basis, I guess is what I'm asking.
We could clarify it to say existing restaurant use in the public right of way as being the use that you're
Okay.
looking at.
Can I suggest that one small addition is that we have the same requirement that we have for restaurants, that they have to use it 3 times a week or
Yeah.
else they forfeit it.
Yeah.
Because I think once the weather changes, we're gonna run into parklets that are empty for the whole week. So I think we need to make sure we do that.
Yeah, I would like to ask a clarification to Councilmember Coulson's question, comment, that if a restaurant initially did not take an offer to have a outdoor dining, and then later on they ask for a encroachment permit when a salon is already in place, you're not suggesting to deny the outdoor permitting for the restaurant, right?
No, I'm suggesting that you know, if you permit the restaurant, then, and the owner of the salon or the now is within 50 feet, they shouldn't have to close.
I think, if I may, Director Martusa was asking, could you permit the restaurant but bar them from forcing the salon to close? In other words,
permit the restaurant, but within the 50 feet.
Right.
It's up to you guys what you want to do on that.
If I might, that creates a little bit of a logical problem. If the 50 feet is necessary for health and safety reasons, then those reasons are still there no matter who came first.
Right. So if the salon was there and it's 50 feet and the restaurant didn't want their encroachment permit, and then 6 months later says, yes, we actually do want it now, but you've already opened a salon and we've put a parklet for the salon. I would not expect the salon to close their parklet in order to open a restaurant. It's sort of too bad for the restaurant.
So what you're saying is that the restaurant itself is outside of the 50 feet, but the parklet would be inside of the 50 feet.
I'm saying, like, let's just say the restaurant's right next door. Let's say you have a restaurant, they're not operating outside, they're closed. They're like, we're not going to do it. We're just not doing it. The parklet opens, then the restaurant comes back 3 months later and says, yeah, now we want to operate outside. But the restaurant is closer than 50 feet to the existing personal services parklet. Do you shut the personal services parklet down and give the restaurant priority? Or do you tell the restaurant, sorry, you can't open a restaurant within 50 feet of a personal services? I mean, it has to go both ways, is what I'm saying. Right, Kathleen? Is that what?
Well, that was the impression that I got. I mean, that is a policy decision for the council again, but just with the caveat that if the reason that you're imposing a 50-foot setback is that there are health and safety issues that justify it, then those health and safety issues pertain no matter who got there first. If there are other ways of mitigating the health and safety issues, then it's a different conversation, but that has not been the direction of council so far.
So Director Martusa, you brought up it sounded like you were concerned about that, and I'd like to understand why, because we kind of went there, and I just want to make sure you have an opportunity to speak to that.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to make sure that later on the council is not, I wanted to make sure the council is clear about this deliberation, the direction itself, because if we later on receive complaints from restaurants that they're not treated fairly, or they have not had the opportunity because of the salon, I just want to make sure that council is taking that into consideration.
So I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Vice Mayor O'Brien.
Through the mayor. So the way I was kind of understanding it is that the restaurants had the opportunity. So if the restaurant declines that opportunity and the hair/nail salon is allowed, why wouldn't it be that we wouldn't allow that restaurant? They did have that opportunity and they declined it. So why should the hair or nail salon be punished because they changed their mind?
But here's the, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, if I could.
Sure.
So the question is, okay, you have a restaurant that's in the location, it's licensed, it has the business signage, everything. So we know there's a restaurant there, but it's temporarily closed because of the COVID. So the question right there is, do we allow the parklet for the salon right next door, even though this guy's right there? They're temporarily closed, but there's still a restaurant right there. So at that point, do we allow that parklet? In my mind, if there's a restaurant licensed to be right there, then we say no to the parklet. And so that whole other issue is moot, because if they want to set up or not, the salon was not allowed.
Okay, so no, Councilmember Ortiz, that's different than I think the motion was.
Well, I think the motion hasn't been finalized because it's exactly this kind of clarification that's needed.
And I'm just addressing Councilmember Colson's concern. And again,
I don't care what the answer. I'm beyond care. I mean, I care, but I just want it to be clear so that, you know.
So again, trying to tie this back to the thing that you're regulating, right? The reason why you have this 50-foot setback is because you're concerned about health and safety issues, conflicts between personal services and restaurant uses. If the restaurant use is not outside or is takeout only, do those conflicts still exist?
No.
Because that would be the justification for one justification for the version that Councilmember Ortiz just articulated. The other justification would be a policy determination that we want to allow restaurants, whether they're currently outside or not, to effectively have an option reservation on that outside space for as long as they're a restaurant, whether they ever use it or not. That would be a different kind of policy decision. But again, that would be less about the life safety health issues and more about kind of an economic policy decision to say that unless we believe that there are conflicts between having a nail service in a parklet and a restaurant doing takeout from their storefront.
There you go. That's what I'm talking
Oh, okay. Okay. The issue I think that we were trying to address is the incompatibility for health, safety, privacy of two parklets next door to each other, operating restaurant next door to personal services. But I don't think I heard that there was concern about a salon operating outdoor in a parklet with a restaurant doing takeout, doing restaurant activity indoors if they're allowed to do indoors. Is that correct?
Well, no, I in my mind, that 50-foot included a restaurant, whether it was operating outside or not. So,
Oh, no, in my mind, that was not the issue. My mind, it was the outdoor activity.
okay, so good. I'm glad we had that because yeah, that's not what I was thinking.
Yeah, to me, it's the outdoor activity. If it's a takeout, that's fine. To me, it's more the health aspect when you have two parklets next to each other.
And in that case, Vice Mayor O'Brien, I'm still comfortable with who got there first, sets the parklet option that are adjacent to each other. If the nail salon is there first.
I would tend to agree. It's the one that was able to commit first.
Yep.
And just for clarity's sake, again, so that staff can administer this, I'm assuming by got there first, we mean submitted a complete application for an encroachment permit
Yes.
rather than physical presence if physical presence hasn't been established yet.
Right.
Yes.
That seems reasonable to me because it's the outdoor activity that we're trying to.
And I'm also assuming we're talking about 50 feet in any direction. So if we have a restaurant, for example, that has an existing encroachment permit for sidewalk dining, but doesn't yet have a parklet or maybe doesn't want a parklet, that we're measuring 50 feet from the sidewalk dining sort of diagonally to a parklet. It's not just parklet to parklet, sidewalk to sidewalk, right? It's you're within 50 feet in any direction from an outdoor restaurant use.
Well,
Good
this
question.
comes back to a question that, we're arbitrarily kind of picking the 50 feet based on San Mateo. So, unless city attorney, you can prove otherwise that we can do a less, footage and still maintain health and safety, then I would be flexible with that. I just don't know what that distance should or should not be. I'm basing it on what San Mateo did theirs. But
Right, and
I'm articulating the health issues that I see. So if we can mitigate that in shorter distance, great. If we can't, then 50 feet either direction.
Yeah, and I'm quite confident in saying that as staff, we don't know what the basis for the 50 feet was and whether that's the right number. It could be more or it could be less depending on the health aspects that you're trying to mitigate, right? Because I don't have any information about, average wind speed and dispersion of nail clippings and how far they go and what, that kind of thing. So I think that if that's an open question, then that may be something that staff has to look into a little bit more about what are the actual underlying health concerns, right? And I've heard odor, like bio waste kind of issues, right? Chemical waste issues,
Right.
hair, which I guess would be bio waste. So what kind of conflicts practically do those create? How far do they disperse? How much distance do you need for normal operations? Because the other thing we can't do is construct a system where it is the regulation, the enforcement becomes we'd have to station somebody there 24/7 to make sure that they were, like, it has to be a practical thing that we can actually monitor and see whether they're taking the steps necessary. Again, that's partly what the state regulations were designed to address, but it sounds like there are some holes in them when it comes to this conflicts question about, adjacent uses and how much space you really should have there, because odors do travel and, things blow around and so on.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner, if you're still with us, our typical storefronts are for restaurants, are they approximately 50 feet? I'm trying to think, a typical storefront.
They're
Is that where they
usually
came up with that?
more, I'd say 25 feet is 25, 35 feet, thereabouts. 50 feet would be pretty wide. But yeah, my guess, I don't really want to guess San Mateo, but it may be, maybe a storefront module, or it may just be something that is a familiar distance that seems reasonable.
Maybe it's a storefront module, could be.
We also do have some of those smaller kind of, the more intimate spaces where they're sort of just a smaller unit. So they end up being sort of two in a particular building. So not all of our spaces are kind of uniform in terms of how much street frontage they present.
So we're spinning right now. We've got to make a decision to give staff some direction. I still think that it's imperfect information we have here, but I think that the motion on the table with a 50-foot sort of distance that puts a healthy storefront distance between activities that could have, that we're concerned about health, safety, and privacy. Two different uses that are very different, and one of which can only be covered on one side. I'm comfortable with. Do colleagues have additional questions or comments on this motion? Go ahead, Councilmember Coulson.
Before you do a lot of work on this, I think that the first thing you should do is just really quickly reach out to all these salons and even just find out who's interested. I mean, we may do a ton of work on this and not one salon is interested in doing this. So I just think you got to know what you're dealing with. Do you have 40 salons that'd be interested, 2 salons, 1 salon? And maybe if you understood that data, then it would be easier to, if you understood that data, then it would be easier to craft a policy to kind of deal with the specifics around the ones that are interested in, at least for now. And because I agree with Vice Mayor Keegren and Councilman Ortiz, I don't think there's going to be a lot of new businesses. So,
yep. I think that's reasonable. I think we've given the important direction and even the specifics of the feet. I think we're inclined. There's something intriguing about mimicking San Mateo, but I would be comfortable also being flexible on that number, where the Economic Development Subcommittee could help craft a better number if it comes to be, if there's a better number that staff and the committee recommend, and see which businesses are actually open to this. But I think what I think staff really needed from us tonight is, are we open to public spaces? We're not open to sidewalks. We're willing to work and consider options in parklets on the streets and in city-owned parking lots. And we just want some space separating those very different kinds of services. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Councilmember Brown. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If I could just clarify too, that the original maker of the motion may not want to be the maker of this revised version. So I just want to make sure that we clarify that as well.
Sure.
The original maker of the motion is very happy with going along with whatever gets this moving forward.
Okay.
So I don't mind. I think we need to clarify that it's outdoor restaurant operations versus just a restaurant. When we say that, but other than that, then I'm in favor of it. My motion stands.
Okay, and Councilmember Brownrigg, do you have one more comment on the motion before we vote?
No, Madam Mayor, but I would like to suggest that I would completely support the mayor writing to Governor Newsom, basically endorsing Dr. Morrow's point that these indoor activities by salons do not seem to be a point of COVID And frankly, we'd like to keep our guys in business without putting restaurants out of business. So I'd like to endorse a letter like that.
I think that sounds like another great motion if we want to do that as well. Let's go ahead and
I think the latter, if I may, through the mayor, the latter probably doesn't require a motion. You can just see if there's majority support for you to do that through a show of nodding and assent. And then the other issue is, did we have a second on that motion? I didn't record one.
And the motion, Councilmember Ortiz, was for a hard and fast 50 feet, or do you want to have flexibility in that feet?
I like 50.
Okay.
And I think it is, yeah, one storefront distance, I think makes sense. It's not scientific, but I just seemed like a reasonable distance.
Okay, and so I heard that motion with the clarification, which thank you for bringing up, that it's outdoor restaurant activity, not just takeout, right? Outdoor restaurant parklets, it was your concern. The space distance, am I seeing that? Councilmember Ortiz?
I believe it would also apply to sidewalk dining, not just parklets by restaurants. So outdoor, 50 feet from existing outdoor restaurant uses in the public right of way.
Councilmember Ortiz, that quantifies your motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor, that's
okay.
perfect.
And then Vice Mayor O'Brien, did I hear a second from you? On
Well, I did, but now I'm taking that back because of this 50-foot distance, because then Councilmember Ortiz said, well, adjacent restaurant. And Kevin Gardner said, you know, many of the storefronts are 25 feet, not 50. So if you're talking adjacent, we might be better saying 25 versus 50. So that's the question I have for clarification.
I think Councilmember Ortiz recommended 50 to be consistent.
Okay, but I'm just saying in that same statement, he said adjacent restaurant. So an adjacent restaurant, it could be two buildings. Technically, if you're looking at 25 feet, it could be two restaurants in a row. So that's why I'm bringing it up.
I don't remember saying adjacent, but if I did,
I thought you did. Okay.
So but what I'm saying is the restriction would be 50 feet from an outdoor operation of a restaurant.
Existing
Existing restaurant.
Of a restaurant.
So, question?
Councilmember Coulson, sure. Do you have
Thank
a
you.
comment
So
on the
50
motion?
feet then would exclude across the street as well, because our streets, I take it, Director Mertuzza, are in some cases less than 50 feet, like 35 or 40 feet.
Yes, if you look at the parklet, which is 9 feet wide from the sidewalk, so the street is 20 foot across the street would be the next parklet.
Right. So you might have say you had a salon, and then if there was a restaurant across the street, but nothing on either side, a restaurant across the street would not prohibit. With 50 feet, you wouldn't be able to put, even though there was nothing adjacent on either side, across the street would eliminate it.
Yeah, it would be in conflict with the 50 foot across the street, yes.
Councilmember Ortiz, would you like to amend your motion that the 50 foot has to be on the same side of the street?
Why don't we just drop it to 25 feet and that way we take care of the street and the adjacent and we can all go home. Well, we are home, but that's a whole other thing.
Would you like to amend your motion 25 feet?
Yes, amending my motion to 25 feet.
I would like to just clarify one more thing, is that the space between parklet to parklet on Burlingame Avenue would be approximately 21 feet, not 25 feet.
Down 20.
Director Mertuzza, I'm confused. Existing parklets have 21 feet of separation, you're saying?
Right, the parking lanes on the distance between parking lanes where the parklets would be placed, the distance between them across the street is about 21 feet.
So 25 would still eliminate an across the street parklet.
It was directly across the street, but if it was across the street and slightly off, then it would be okay.
Yes.
Well, it could be resolved by just saying that your concern is to address same side of the street operations.
Yeah.
Okay, splitting hairs here. Yes, let's exclude the parklets on the opposite side of the street.
But that doesn't make sense, guys, because then you're back to Kathleen's point. It's either 25 feet because of the health issue, or it's not.
Yeah, that makes.
So you have to basically
You're right.
drop it to 20 if you want to allow it across the street.
You know, when we get down to 20, it starts not making sense, but yes, okay, let's go to 20, that's fine. So my
Because
motion
of-
is amended to be 20 feet, and I would love to hear a second.
I'll second the motion.
I'll
I think-
second it.
I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, after you.
I'll second that.
Okay.
You have council member's hand up, Mayor Beach.
I'm sorry, whose hand is up?
Councilmember Brownrigg.
Councilmember Brownrigg, go ahead.
No, Madam Mayor, I'm prepared to vote.
Okay, and Director Gardner, you said some of our storefronts, you said are some storefronts only 20 feet or so? That would be like the distance of a small storefront?
Yes, I mean, there is a whole range. I'd say the module is, 25 is a kind of standard. There are some that are 20. There's some that are even narrower. I think 20 is also, and Director Marchusa, if you can correct me with the exact number, it's probably about the same length as a parking space, a parallel space as well. So it's kind of, it's a recognizable module. It's both across the street as well as one space away from the nearest parklet. So,
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Kevin, you're correct about parking space about 20 feet wide. On Burlingame Avenue, we have a little bit longer space, lengthier spaces for parallel parking. So it's 24 feet, I believe, in most cases. So.
Okay, so 20 feet has some logic to it, and it could feel like a small distance space. So we have a second from, I forget who seconded.
Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor O'Brien. Let's take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes,
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Yes.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Difficult issues, no clear-cut answer. Who would have dreamed we would have so many issues like this to deal with in 2020? But we appreciate staff's input that helped us tease all this out, and colleagues for the thoughtful debate.
And if I could actually return to an earlier issue, that if, that just to affirm that we have council direction on it, that if there are violations of the reasonable life safety and health restrictions, that these permits can be pulled on one violation, and that they don't need to go through the normal code enforcement process before those permits are pulled.
Okay, does anybody have any concerns about that? Let's open it up to concerns. I see no concerns or hands raised. I see Councilmember Coulson, go ahead.
Sorry. So there's obviously a lot of different violations. Someone walks out, forgets their mask in the store. There's a police officer there. They walk out, their mask is right inside or around their hand. They don't put it on quite on time. They've technically had a violation. Are they shut down for that?
I would suggest that staff draft a short list of the very serious things that should qualify for this, and run it through the Economic Development Committee, and then with their blessing identify, we're not talking about single incidental technical violations. We're talking about someone dumping acetone down the storm drain, that kind of situation.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. The only other question is, there was a suggestion that I sign a letter to the governor that described some of our concerns about this particular regulation. Does anybody object to me signing such a letter that staff will draft and take a look at? And I can do that independently?
Please feel free to plagiarize my letter to the editor.
It was a great letter. Any colleagues with a concern about that? Seeing none, we'll take care of that very shortly. All right.
Have to approve the Broadway closure, continuing that.
Yes. Okay. So we have one more issue. We have a recommendation from the Economic Development Subcommittee to continue the Broadway temporary street closure. Do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember Brownrigg, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, I am very happy to hear from the public, but given the lateness of the hour, the fact that it's a consensus recommendation and that we all know that it's working, I am quite happy to make a motion to approve the recommendation from the Economic Subcommittee to, steady as she goes. So just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. Any other questions? All right, seeing no questions, I'll open it up to public comment in case there's anybody who wishes to speak on this item.
Mayor Beach, we don't have any email Zoom chat about this item.
Okay. Nobody from the public wishes to speak. I'll close public comment. Do we have any other comments on this motion, or would someone like to second it?
Madam Mayor, if I could, I'd like to second it, but I do have one comment.
Sure, go ahead.
We need to keep an eye on the violations on Broadway, make sure that it remains under control. I want to send a message to the merchants on Broadway that if we find that they're having the same issues at Burlingame Avenue, that we might go the same route. So if in fact they like the closed streets, that they should help try to monitor their patrons. And with that, I second it.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. Any other comments before we take a vote? From colleagues, I don't see any hands raised. So Madam City Clerk, go ahead and we'll do our roll call.
Councilmember Coulson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg?
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz?
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien?
Yes.
Mayor Beach?
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Madam City Manager, is there anything else on the street closures that we've overlooked providing direction on, or do you have what you need?
I think we have more than enough and we should just keep moving.
Thank you. All right. Committee activities, reports, and announcements. Anybody want to add anything to the written record? If not, we can always go over stuff next time. All right, seeing no hands raised, future agenda items. Councilmember Brownrigg has his hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I would like to commend you on your report and thank you for letting us know that California got no grants from the infra money from the feds, which is just appalling. So I appreciate your report and your following that issue. I wanted to ask if there might be a second to support the idea of reviewing cannabis delivery services. So not retail services per se, but delivery services in our city. It's been a while since we've considered that whole sphere, but delivery in particular strikes me as well suited to Burlingame, given our logistical center in San Mateo County. And I'd like to propose that we consider that.
Go ahead, Councilmember Coulson, go ahead.
So I would be okay to look into that so long as the report also included analytics around the number of people who are receiving deliveries and the potential for any costs that would be incurred offset by any revenues that would be brought in. Just so we have a comprehensive picture of what what's going on in that business.
But without getting into too much detail, it sounds like we might have a second, but I'd just like the city attorney to comment on our current policy.
Yes, so we currently, as required by state law, in fact, allow deliveries that end in Burlingame, but we don't allow delivery businesses in Burlingame whose business model is delivery of marijuana products. So as I understand it, the question is whether that's something that could or should be allowed in some portion of the city.
Councilmember Brownrigg, is that the issue you're trying to address, the delivery services, or were you talking about just whether or not cannabis can be delivered in Burlingame to private residences?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. The city attorney is quite right. By law, there are delivery services already bringing product to various households in Burlingame. No, the question is whether we would amend our rules, which we basically, punted on before, and to allow a delivery service and to look at the pros and cons, and if we were to do that, where we might allow it. So those sort of questions. And I certainly concur with Councilwoman Colson's elaboration of the issues that should be reviewed.
Okay, so Councilmember Colson, did you second the delivery services?
I would be interested in learning. I just want to make one point of clarification. So we're not talking about retail storefront, a discussion of retail storefront. We're talking about the discussion of, say, like a Amazon warehouse type thing with industrial warehouse with no retail. No one can walk up and purchase marijuana and then leave.
Right.
Okay.
So no public facing retail.
No public facing retail, just distribution.
Okay, and Councilmember Colson said yes, your number 2 vote on that. Okay, so thank you for bringing that up. Any other future agenda items?
If I could just on that, Madam Mayor,
Sure.
If other council members have particular things they want included in that report back, I feel like we have direction as to the general subject matter, but contact staff so that we know what to be looking at and what to be including in the staff report so that you get what you expect to see.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other future agenda items, or can we move on? Seeing no other hands raised. Acknowledgements. Have we lost anyone in the Burlingame community since we last adjourned that we'd like to adjourn in memory of? I see Councilmember Brownrigg has his hand up.
Madam Mayor, I don't know if any of my colleagues want to list anybody, but I'll just speak for a minute and really off the cuff. COVID is so hard on all of us, and I think we all expect to lose people. But you forget that there are lots of other causes of death too. And so I was deeply saddened to learn about a week ago that a good friend of mine on the basketball court, Doug Friedman, a Burlingame resident, 2 beautiful daughters, a loving wife, died very suddenly and far too early of pancreatic cancer. I don't know him well enough off the court to tell you all the things that he accomplished in his life. I can tell you that he was very proud to be in life sciences and to have made his work, to work with companies that are creating solutions to illness and disease around the world. But what I knew him was as a guy on the basketball court who always had a smile, who often had a big butt or an elbow in your way to the basket, who played the game with grace and with fervor and with good humor. And I'll tell you what, as you probably all know in different pursuits, you know a lot about somebody by how they play games. And Doug played fair, he played clean, he played with a smile. And when I got the notice a week ago that he had died, and I had no idea because we haven't played basketball since March. Like so many of us, COVID just shut down a game that's been going on for 20 years, a bunch of old guys running around on the court. And I got the note that Doug wouldn't be coming to our games anymore. And I'm brokenhearted. And I just feel for his wife, Pam, and his daughters. And I just want, with your permission, to close the meeting in honor of Doug Friedman, a great Burlingame resident, a great dad, a great husband and a great basketball player.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg, and I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend, your personal friend, and for the community. I see Councilmember Coulson has her hand raised. She may have known him as well.
Thank you. So I did not know him, and I appreciate Mr. Councilman Brownrigg bringing that up. But I also just note in our notes that came out over the weekend on August 13th, Gwen Kingsmill also passed away. And it sounds like she had been living in Burlingame since she grew up in Canada, and is survived by her 3 children. And she was an artist, a golf player, and she sang in the Burlingame Presbyterian Choir, where she was also a deacon. And she was an animal lover and volunteered at the San Mateo County SPCA. So I just note when we have these big breaks, we often, unfortunately, lose a number of Burlingamers. So I'll just mention her as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. We'll remember Gwen Kingsmill as well. Any other colleagues would like to mention anybody we should remember in our adjournment? All right, then with that, let's have a moment of silence before we adjourn for 2 great Burlingame residents, Doug Friedman and Gwen Kingsmill, thinking of them and their families during these challenging times where we can't even truly honor the people we lose. There aren't services, there aren't gatherings in the way that we all would wish to honor the loved ones that pass. So let's give a moment right now of silence. Thank you all for bearing with us tonight for a very productive meeting. Have a good, safe week or 2 ahead, and take care, everyone. Meeting adjourned 10:55. Good night.
Thank you.